Welcome to Crime for Sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Story 1. The house on Maple Street stood unchanged for nearly a century. 3 stories of weathered brick and ornate Victorian trim, nestled between 2 newer homes that seemed to shrink away from its presence. The Mercer family had purchased it at an estate auction, charmed by its history and the meticulous documentation that came with it, blueprints dating back to 1923, carefully preserved and updated with each renovation. Sarah Mercer ran her fingers along the kitchen's ceramic tiles, admiring their hand-painted designs, while her husband James discussed the plumbing updates with their contractor. Their 7-year-old son had already claimed the tower room as his own, enchanted by its circular window overlooking the neighborhood. The family had spent weeks planning their move, studying the home's layout, imagining where each piece of furniture would go. Which is why the sound a hollow echo when Sarah's coffee mug dropped on one particular tile near the pantry seemed so out of place. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The contractor paused, listening to the silence that followed. "Old houses settle in strange ways," he offered with a shrug, but something in Sarah's expression made him tap his knuckles against the spot. The hollow sound returned, more pronounced this time. By afternoon, they had removed 6 ceramic tiles, revealing what the blueprints had never shown: a trapdoor, its iron ring handle oxidized to a deep rust brown. The wood was old oak, darkened with age but surprisingly solid. Detective Alina Webb arrived the following morning, summoned not by what they had found, but by what they discovered was missing. The basement that wasn't on the plans wasn't empty. "How long have you owned the property?" Detective Webb asked, her voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who had seen too much to be easily disturbed. She held a small notebook, its pages filled with neat handwriting, each detail carefully documented as if every observation might be the one that mattered. "Just 3 weeks," James replied, "but the purchase process took months. We've had the blueprints since January." Webb nodded, making a small note. The basement air hung around them, cool and stagnant, carrying a scent that didn't belong in a house filled with fresh paint and new beginnings. It was the smell of secrets kept too long. The single wooden chair sat in the center of the concrete floor, illuminated by the harsh beam of a work light the contractor had set up. 4 thick metal rings were embedded in the floor, one near each leg of the chair. A heavy chain, its length the width of a man's thumb, connected the front right leg to one of these rings. Decades of rust had sealed some of the links together, but the chain remained intact, a silent testament to its purpose. "The recorder was over there," Sarah said, pointing to a dark corner where the light barely reached. "We didn't touch it." Her voice wavered slightly on the last word. Webb crossed to the corner, crouching to examine the old tape recorder without disturbing its position. It was a realistic model from the late 1970s, the kind with mechanical buttons that clicked audibly when pressed. A cassette tape remained inside, its small window revealing that it had been partially played. "The previous owner was Alina Blackwood," Webb said, more to herself than to the couple. "Lived alone for 30 years after her husband passed, kept to herself. The neighbors said she never had visitors." The detective carefully photographed the recorder from multiple angles before placing it in an evidence bag. The chain came next, requiring bolt cutters to separate it from the chair. Each item was catalogued, labeled, preserved in the methodical routine of an investigation that had only just begun. 2 days later, in the quiet confines of the police station's evidence room, Detective Webb pressed play on the recorder, now connected to a digital system that would preserve whatever sounds remained on the aging magnetic tape. A soft hiss filled the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of breathing, slow, measured, controlled. 10 seconds passed, 20. Then a man's voice broke the silence. Session 17. Subject continues to resist standard techniques. The voice was clinical, detached, increasing duration to 6 hours. Note: maintain household appearance above, neighbors becoming curious. The tape continued with methodical notes about progress and resistance thresholds, occasionally interrupted by another voice, faint, distant, perhaps coming from the chair itself. These sounds were never clear enough to form words, just human utterances stripped of everything but pain. Webb's investigation expanded outward from the house on Maple Street. Hospital records revealed that Richard Blackwood, Alina's husband, had been a respected psychiatrist specializing in behavioral modification before his supposed death in 1989. His body had never been found, just an empty car near a bridge and a suicide note that his colleagues had found surprisingly out of character. The property records showed that the Blackwood house had been extensively renovated in 1987, with a contractor who had mysteriously disappeared the following year. His family had reported him missing, but the case had grown cold when his truck was discovered at a bus station 3 states away. In Alina Blackwood's personal papers, Webb found journals spanning decades, their entries becoming increasingly paranoid and fragmented after 1989. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before her death from natural causes, contained only 5 words: "He's still in the walls." The forensic team excavated the basement floor a week after the initial discovery. 6 feet below the concrete, they found human remains, not one body, but 3, each carefully positioned around the perimeter of the room. DNA testing would later confirm that one set belonged to Richard Blackwood. The tape from the recorder contained 17 sessions in total, each documented with the same clinical precision. The voice belonged to Richard Blackwood, according to voice analysis. The identity of his subjects remains unknown. Alina Blackwood's will had specified that the house be sold with all its contents intact. The estate lawyer had been instructed never to enter the basement, an instruction he had followed without question, assuming it contained nothing more than old furniture and forgotten keepsakes. The Mercer family never moved into the house on Maple Street. It stands empty now, its windows reflecting the changing seasons, while investigators continue to piece together the events that transpired within its walls. The blueprints have been updated one final time, the basement that wasn't on the plans now carefully documented with measurements precise to the inch. And in the evidence room at the local police station, a small cassette tape sits in a locked cabinet, its contents transcribed and analyzed, but never fully understood, a recording of sessions that took place in a room that wasn't supposed to exist, conducted by a man who was supposed to be dead. Story 2, the framed picture had been hanging in the hallway for years. A perfect family moment, parents, children, the family dog, but one night as she walked past, something made her stop. There was another person in the photo. A man standing in the background, his face slightly blurred. She had never seen him before, and the next morning the photo had changed again. He was closer. Detective Sarah Mercer sipped her coffee slowly, feeling the warmth spread through her fingers as she held the ceramic mug. The precinct was quiet this early in the morning. Only the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional shuffle of papers broke the silence. She studied the photograph in front of her, carefully placed in a clear evidence bag. Her eyes traced the edges of the frame, worn slightly at the corners, a family keepsake, handled and loved for years. "The Townsend case," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the empty room. The call had come in 3 days ago. Eleanor Townsend, 42, had reported something impossible, a stranger appearing in her family photograph, moving closer each day. At first, the department had dismissed it a prank, perhaps, or the delusion of a troubled mind, but then Eleanor had brought in the photograph. Sarah's fingers glided over the evidence bag, feeling the subtle texture of the plastic. The photograph showed the Townsend family at a lakeside picnic from 5 years ago. Robert and Eleanor Townsend stood smiling, their hands resting on their children's shoulders, twins Emily and Michael, 10 years old at the time. Their golden retriever Max sat obediently at their feet, and there in the background, partially obscured by trees, was a figure. A man in dark clothing, his features indistinct, but his presence undeniable. The detective pulled out her notebook, the leather cover soft and worn from years of use. Her pen made a gentle scratching sound as she reviewed her notes from yesterday's interview. "I've looked at that photograph nearly every day for 5 years," Eleanor had said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "That man was never there before, and now each morning he's closer to my family." Sarah had asked the obvious questions. Had the frame been tampered with? Could someone have access to their home? Had they checked for digital manipulation? The answers were all negative. The frame hadn't been opened, their security system recorded no intrusions, and the photograph was from before the digital age, a physical print from a roll of film they developed after their vacation. The detective turned the evidence bag over, studying the back of the frame. No signs of tampering were visible. The lab had confirmed it. If someone had changed the photograph, they'd left no traces. Sarah stood up, stretching her back as she walked to the evidence board. Pinned there were 3 photographs, all apparently the same family portrait, taken in sequence over 3 days. In the first, the strange man stood at the edge of the frame, barely visible among the trees. In the second, he had moved forward, now standing clearly in the background, about 20 feet behind the family. In the third, the one Eleanor had brought in yesterday, he stood just 10 feet behind them, his features still blurred, but his posture unmistakably directed toward the children. The coffee in Sarah's mug had cooled, but she took another sip anyway, her eyes never leaving the board. Something about the man's posture nagged at her. The way he stood, slightly hunched, with his head tilted at an angle, it seemed familiar somehow. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Officer Jenkins entered, carrying a manila folder. "Got the background check on the Townsends," he said, his voice resonating in the quiet room. "Nothing unusual. Robert works in finance. Eleanor is a part-time librarian. The twins are now 15 good students, no trouble. They've lived in that house for 12 years. Sarah nodded, taking the folder. Any connection to photography, darkroom experience, anything that might explain this? Jenkins shook his head. "Nothing stands out," but he hesitated. "We did find something interesting about the lakeside cabin where they took that photo. There was an incident there 3 years before the Townsends' visit." Sarah's pen hovered over her notebook. What kind of incident? "A disappearance. A local man, Joseph Merrick, went missing. Never found. The case went cold." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the precinct's air conditioning. She returned to her desk, pulling up the case file on her computer. The screen cast a pale blue glow on her face as she scrolled through the details. Joseph Merrick, 38, last seen walking near the lake. No body ever recovered. Few leads, no suspects. And then she saw his photograph, a driver's license photo taken 2 years before his disappearance. The slightly hunched posture, the tilted head, the resemblance to the figure in the Townsend's photograph was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah reached for her phone, dialing Alina Townsend's number. The clock on the wall showed 6:42 a.m. early, but this couldn't wait. "Mrs. Townsend," she said when Alina answered, her voice thick with sleep. "I need you to check the photograph again." There was silence, then the sound of movement. Sarah could picture Alina walking down the hallway, approaching the portrait that had brought her such distress. "Oh God," Alina's voice came through the phone, trembling now. "Detective, he's standing right behind us now, right behind my children." Sarah was already grabbing her keys. "I'm on my way, don't touch the photograph." As she drove through the quiet streets of the early morning, Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. A haunting, an elaborate hoax, some form of psychological suggestion. None seemed to fit the evidence. When she arrived at the Townsend home, Alina was waiting at the door, her husband standing protectively behind her. They led Sarah to the hallway where the portrait hung. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The strange man now stood directly behind the Townsend twins in the photograph, his hands hovering just above their shoulders. His face was clearer, now gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly at the viewer, at Sarah. She took out her phone and pulled up Joseph Merrick's driver's license photo. The resemblance was undeniable. "Did you ever meet this man?" she asked, showing the phone to the Townsends. They both shook their heads. "Who is he?" Robert asked. "His name was Joseph Merrick. He disappeared near the lake where you took this photo, 3 years before your vacation there." Alina's hand went to her mouth. "What does he want with our family?" Sarah had no answer, but as she studied the photograph again, she noticed something she'd missed before. In the bottom corner of the image, barely visible, was a ripple in the water of the lake, a ripple that seemed to form words when viewed from the right angle. "Look beneath," Sarah whispered, reading the message in the water. That afternoon, local authorities at the lake began dredging operations in the area where the Townsends had taken their family portrait 5 years ago. By evening, they had recovered human remains. Preliminary identification suggested they belonged to Joseph Merrick. In the Townsend home, the family portrait changed one final time. The figure of the man was gone, leaving only the smiling family, parents, children, and their dog. But if one looked closely at the lake in the background, there appeared to be a thank you written in the ripples of the water. The case would be filed as solved, though the explanation would remain officially undocumented. Detective Sarah Mercer would keep the series of photographs in her personal files, a reminder that sometimes justice finds its way through channels that defy explanation. And in households across America, people began to look more carefully at their family portraits, wondering what secrets might be hiding in the backgrounds of their most treasured memories. Story 3. The floor had always creaked near the fireplace, a hollow sound that no one questioned. But when the new tenants decided to renovate, they lifted the wooden planks and froze. Beneath them, wrapped in faded cloth, were stacks of old letters. Every envelope was addressed to the same name, written over and over. A name that wasn't in the house's records. A name that had been crossed out on every letter except the last one. Hannah Miller stood motionless in the living room of 42 Sycamore Lane, watching as Detective Reed carefully photographed each letter before placing it in an evidence bag. The late afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the newly exposed subfloor. The house, built in 1937, had seen multiple owners, but none had thought to look beneath the warped floorboard that had creaked for decades. "How many letters are there?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might disturb something that had been at rest for a very long time. 47, Detective Reed replied without looking up. His latex-gloved hands moved methodically, a practiced rhythm born from years of preserving evidence. All addressed to Alina Winters, all returned unopened except for the final one. The name meant nothing to Hannah. She and her husband Mark had purchased the house 3 months ago from an elderly couple who had lived there for just under a decade. Before them, the property records showed a series of short-term owners, none staying longer than 5 years. The house had a restlessness to it, as if it couldn't quite keep its residents comfortable enough to stay. Detective Reed carefully unfolded the last letter, the only one whose seal had been broken. His eyes moved slowly across the faded ink, absorbing each word as if they might dissolve if read too quickly. The paper crackled softly between his fingers, the sound amplified in the silent room. "The letters date from 1952 to 1954, he said finally. "All written by someone named James. No last name, just James." The investigation into the mysterious letters began quietly, without urgency. There was no evidence of a crime, just the strange circumstances of hidden correspondence to a woman who, according to county records, had never lived at the address. Detective Reed assigned the case to Officer Lily Chen, a meticulous researcher with a background in historical archives. Officer Chen worked in a small, windowless room at the precinct, surrounded by boxes of microfiche and old city directories. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights above created a cocoon of concentration as she traced the history of 42 Sycamore Lane and the elusive Alina Winters. 3 days into her research, Officer Chen discovered something that changed the trajectory of the investigation. A newspaper article from May 1954 mentioned a missing persons case. Local seamstress Alina Winters, 27, reported missing after 2-week absence. The article was small, tucked between advertisements for laundry soap and men's hats, as if the disappearance of a single woman wasn't worth much column space. When Officer Chen cross-referenced the date with the letters found under the floorboards, she noticed that the final letter, the only one that had been opened, was dated just 1 week before Alina was reported missing. The content of the last letter became the focal point of the investigation. James, whoever he was, had written, "Alina, I cannot bear your silence any longer. I know you've received my letters, even if you refuse to acknowledge them. If you won't respond, I'll have no choice but to find you. We need to finish what we started." Detective Reed ordered a careful examination of the house, particularly the area under and around the fireplace where the letters had been hidden. The forensic team arrived early on a Tuesday morning, their van parked discreetly on the street as neighbors left for work, casting curious glances toward the house that had suddenly become the center of attention in their otherwise quiet neighborhood. By midday, the team had found nothing to suggest foul play. The space beneath the floorboards showed no signs of disturbance beyond the carefully placed letters. But when they expanded their search to the chimney, they made a discovery that sent a chill through the investigation team. Wedged inside a loose brick in the chimney was a small leather wallet. Inside was a driver's license belonging to Alina Winters, expired in 1953, and a faded photograph of a young woman standing beside a tall, thin man whose face had been carefully scratched out of the image. On the back of the photograph, written in the same handwriting as the letters, were the words, "What once was will never be again." The case of Alina Winters transformed from a curious historical footnote into an active investigation. Detective Reed interviewed former residents of the house, though most had little to offer. The elderly couple who had sold the house to Hannah and Mark remembered the creaking floorboard, but had never thought to investigate it. Just an old house settling, they had assumed. It was during these interviews that a name emerged: James Harmon, a local doctor who had owned the house briefly in the early 1950s before selling it and relocating to the West Coast. Records showed he had died in 1987, taking whatever secrets he may have had to his grave. As weeks passed, the investigation hit one dead end after another. Alina Winters seemed to have vanished completely after 1954, with no death certificate, no marriage records, no indication that she had left town or started a new life elsewhere. Then on a rainy Thursday afternoon, Officer Chen discovered a connection that had been overlooked. Alina's occupation as a seamstress had brought her into contact with James Harmon's wife, Virginia. Alina had altered Virginia's clothes and, according to an interview in a local society column, had become almost like family to the Harmons. Virginia Harmon had died suddenly in early 1952, just months before the first letter to Alina had been written. The official cause was listed as heart failure, but no autopsy had been performed. James Harmon, the respected local doctor, had signed the death certificate himself. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Hannah Miller, while clearing out an old garden shed behind the house, found a small tin box buried beneath a loose flagstone. Inside was a single page torn from what appeared to be a diary. The handwriting matched samples they had of Alina's from her business records. The entry read, "V suspects, I can no longer continue this. Jay says we can be together once she's gone, but I fear what he might do. The medicine he gave her, he says no one will question it. I cannot live with this knowledge. I must leave, but where can I go that he won't find me?" The case of Alina Winters and James Harmon was never officially solved. No body was ever found, no confession ever made. But in the records of the police department, Alina's case remains open, a mystery suspended in time like the letters hidden beneath the floorboards for decades. Hannah and Mark Miller eventually completed their renovations on 42 Sycamore Lane. They replaced the creaking floorboard and reinforced the chimney. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when the house is still, Hannah swears she can hear the faint sound of paper rustling, as if someone is reading old letters in an empty room, searching for an answer that never came. Story 4, it was just a guest room, nothing unusual, except for the lock, thick and industrial, bolted on the outside of the door. The landlord said it had always been there, left from a previous owner. But on the first night in the house, the new tenant heard it, a quiet knock from inside the room. Morgan Chen had just moved to Millfield after accepting a position at the local university. The Victorian house on Sycamore Lane seemed perfect, spacious, affordable, with character that modern apartments lacked. The landlord, a thin man named Harold Willis, had handed over the keys with a perfunctory smile and a folder of information about the property. "Everything's been renovated except for a few original features we kept for historical value," he'd explained, his voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who had given the same speech many times. "The lock on the upstairs guest room is one of them. Previous owner's addition, nothing to worry about." Morgan had nodded, barely registering the comment amid the excitement of moving in. The house creaked and settled as old houses do, wooden floors that whispered beneath footsteps, windows that rattled slightly when the wind blew from the east, normal sounds that became background noise by the evening. Until the knocking. 3 soft taps, barely audible. Morgan froze in the hallway, a glass of water halfway to lips that suddenly felt dry. The sound had come from the guest room, the one with the peculiar lock. For several minutes, Morgan stood perfectly still, listening. Nothing. Perhaps it had been imagination, or the house settling in unfamiliar ways. Detective Alina Reeves sat across from Morgan 3 days later, her pen moving steadily across her notepad. The precinct interview room was cool and sterile, with fluorescent lights that hummed just at the edge of hearing. A tape recorder on the table captured each word, each hesitation. "And you didn't open the door that first night?" Reeves asked, her voice level and professional. She wore no jewelry except for a simple watch, its face turned inward toward her wrist. "No," Morgan replied, fingers wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. "I convinced myself it was nothing. Old houses make sounds. I went to bed and didn't think about it again until the next evening." The second night had brought the same 3 knocks, slightly louder. Morgan had approached the door, called out, received no answer. The lock was heavy in hand-cold metal that required effort to slide open. The room beyond had been empty, just a bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the backyard. Nothing unusual except for a faint scent that Morgan couldn't quite identify, something earthy and distant. "I checked the closet under the bed. Nothing. I felt foolish," Morgan explained to Detective Reeves, who nodded without looking up from her notes. "And the third night?" Reeves prompted. The third night, Morgan's voice grew quieter. The knocking was different, urgent. 4 knocks, then a pause, then 4 more. "I was in the kitchen when it started, and I ran upstairs. The sound stopped as soon as I reached the hallway." Morgan had stood outside the guest room door for nearly 10 minutes, heart racing, before working up the courage to unlock it. The room appeared unchanged. Same bed, same dresser, same window, but there was something on the floor that hadn't been there before, a small, tarnished locket on a broken chain. Detective Reeves leaned forward slightly. "And that's when you decided to do some research about the house?" Morgan nodded. The university library had access to digitized local newspapers going back decades. It hadn't taken long to find the article from 1978, MILLFIELD resident missing. Investigation continues. Alina Matthews, 23, reported missing by her roommate. Last seen returning to their rented house on Sycamore Lane. Further searching revealed more. The roommate had been Harold Willis, now Morgan's landlord. Police had investigated but found no evidence of foul play. The case had gone cold until 3 years later, when the next tenant of the house reported hearing strange sounds from a locked guest room. That tenant had moved out within a week. Since then, the pattern had repeated every few years, tenants reporting unusual sounds, then discovering the history of the house and leaving. Harold Willis had eventually purchased the property in 1992. "The locket," Detective Reeves said, sliding an evidence bag across the table. Inside was the tarnished piece of jewelry Morgan had found. We opened it. There's a photo inside and an inscription, E.M. Aliner Matthews. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the barely audible tick of the detective's watch. We've obtained a warrant to search the property, Reeves continued after a moment. Ground-penetrating radar of the Foundation revealed an anomaly beneath the guest room. We're bringing in a team tomorrow. Morgan stared at the locket in the evidence bag. He kept the lock on the door all these years. He kept it as a reminder. Detective Reeves finally set down her pen, or as a trophy. 2 days later, the remains of Aliner Matthews were discovered buried within the foundation of the house, directly beneath the guest room floor. Harold Willis was taken into custody without incident. In his statement, he claimed that Aliner's death had been an accident, an argument that escalated, a push that sent her falling down the stairs. Panic had led to poor decisions. The foundation had been under renovation at the time, a convenient solution to an inconvenient problem. The locket had been Aliner's, removed before her burial and kept in Willis's possession until recently, when his increasing dementia had caused him to place it in the room during one of his regular checks of the property. As for the knocking that multiple tenants had reported over the years, this remained unexplained. Detective Reeves documented the claims, but included no official speculation in her final report. The case was closed, justice delayed, but finally delivered. Morgan Chen moved out of the house on Sycamore Lane the following week, but often woke in the new apartment to the phantom sound of 3 soft knocks, a quiet request to be remembered, to be found, to be known. The old Victorian still stands, its rooms now empty, its secrets revealed. The guest room door remains, though the lock has been removed, a small mercy for whatever might linger there, finally free to leave. Story 5, she had lived in the apartment for weeks before noticing it, the whispering. At first she thought it was the neighbors, their voices carrying through the thin walls, but then she pressed her ear to the vent. The voices weren't muffled, they were clear, sharp, as if someone was speaking directly inside the ducts. And then, just before she pulled away, the whisper turned into a question. "Can you hear me?" The air in apartment 4B seemed to change after that night. 26-year-old Eliza Mercer had moved into the renovated Westlake apartments in early October. The building, a converted textile factory from the 1920s, retained much of its industrial character, exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and an elaborate network of ventilation ducts that snaked through each unit like metal veins. Management had marketed these features as authentic industrial charm. Now they felt more like unwanted conduits. Detective Thomas Reed pressed his fingertips against the smooth surface of his desk as he reviewed the case file. The manila folder was too thin for a disappearance that had now stretched into its 3rd week. A cup of coffee cooled beside him, the surface still as glass in the quiet of the early morning precinct. The only sound was the soft shuffling of papers as he turned each page with methodical precision. Eliza Mercer's friends had reported her missing after she failed to appear at a birthday dinner. They described her as reliable, punctual, not someone who would vanish without explanation. Her phone had gone unanswered. Her social media accounts had fallen silent. When officers performed the initial welfare check, her apartment had been found in pristine condition, nothing out of place, no signs of struggle, just an empty space with the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air. "She mentioned something odd during our last call," said Catherine, Eliza's closest friend, her voice soft and measured as Detective Reed recorded her statement. She twisted a silver ring around her finger, a nervous habit that seemed to help her concentrate. said she was hearing voices through the vents. I told her it was probably just the neighbors, but she seemed unsettled by it. Reed nodded, making a note without comment. Old buildings had their quirks. Sound traveled in unexpected ways through ductwork and wall cavities. Nothing inherently suspicious about that. Yet something about Catherine's description lingered with him as he drove to the Westlake apartments later that afternoon. The late autumn light was already fading, casting long shadows across the building's red brick facade. The property manager, a thin man with perpetually damp palms, unlocked Eliza's apartment with obvious reluctance. "We've had other tenants complain about noise," he offered without prompting, "but it's just the settling of an old building, nothing more." Reed moved through the apartment with practiced efficiency. Everything appeared normal. Clean dishes in the rack by the sink, a half-read novel on the nightstand, bookmark still in place, a small potted succulent on the windowsill, slightly wilted from lack of water, the ordinary artifacts of a life temporarily paused. When he knelt beside the heating vent near Eliza's bed, the metal grate was cool against his fingertips. The building's heating system hadn't yet been activated for the season. He leaned closer, feeling slightly foolish as he positioned his ear near the slats. Silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, a faint current of air brushed against his cheek. Somewhere deep in the building's infrastructure, air was moving. Over the next few days, Reed quietly investigated the building's history. The Westlake Mill had operated until 1972 before sitting vacant for decades. Its renovation into apartments had been completed just 18 months ago. The contractors had preserved much of the original ductwork, merely adding modern connections for the HVAC system. "Did you know there was an accident here back in '67? The question came from Edwin Carr, a retired factory worker Reed tracked down through county records. The old man's arthritic hands trembled slightly as he sipped his coffee in the small diner where they'd agreed to meet. "Young woman got caught in one of the machines. Terrible thing. They say her voice could be heard through the ventilation system for days after, calling for help." Reed nodded politely but made no note of this. Urban legends often attached themselves to old industrial buildings. He was interested in facts, not folklore. 3 days later, Reed returned to Westlake with a warrant to inspect the building's mechanical systems. The maintenance supervisor guided him through narrow service corridors and into the basement where the main ventilation system originated. The air was noticeably cooler here, carrying the scent of metal and dust. "These ducts connect to every apartment," the supervisor explained, pointing to a complex network of metal channels that spread outward like the branches of an ancient tree. Amazing acoustics in these old systems. You could practically have a conversation between floors if you knew which vents connected. As they moved deeper into the maintenance tunnels, Reed noticed a section of ductwork that appeared newer than the rest. "What's this?" he asked, running his hand along the smooth metal surface. The supervisor shrugged, not sure, wasn't on the original blueprints, must have been added during renovation. Reed borrowed a screwdriver from the supervisor's tool belt and carefully removed the access panel. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness inside, revealing a narrow channel that extended upward. And there, caught against an internal seam, was a single strand of long, dark hair. Forensic analysis would later confirm that the hair belonged to Eliza Mercer. Further examination of the ventilation system uncovered a hidden space A maintenance room from the original factory that had been walled over during renovation. Inside, investigators found evidence that someone had been living there secretly for months. Sound carried perfectly from this space through the ductwork to apartment 4B. The property manager eventually confessed. He had become obsessed with Eliza after showing her the apartment, watching her through the vents, whispering to her. When she had threatened to report him, he had acted impulsively. The case file grew thicker with each passing day as evidence accumulated. Justice would come, but it would bring no peace to those who had known Eliza. Detective Reed still visits Westlake occasionally. The building has new management now. Most of the current residents don't know the story. But sometimes, standing in the hallway outside apartment 4B, he thinks he can hear something, the faintest whisper carrying through the metal veins of the building. Just air moving through an old system, he tells himself. Nothing more than that, but he never stays long enough to make sure. Story 6. The motel was old, nearly abandoned, its furniture mismatched and its walls yellowed with age. She was just passing through, staying for a single night, but when she opened the closet, she found a wooden box, heavy and sealed shut. There was no keyhole, no latch, just deep scratches along the edges, as if someone inside had been trying to get out. Detective Sarah Morrow stood in the emptied motel room 3 days later, the morning light filtering through thin curtains that hardly moved in the still air. Room 17 of the Pinewood Motel had become a crime scene, though nothing about it appeared extraordinary at first glance. The bed was made with military precision. The bathroom sink gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light. Everything was in order, except for the wooden box that now sat on a plastic sheet in the center of the floor. "We got the call at 6:42 a.m., Officer Jenkins said, his voice low and measured as he flipped through his notepad. The woman who found it checked out immediately after, paid cash for her stay. No security cameras caught her face clearly." Sarah nodded, circling the box at a distance. It was roughly 2 feet long, made of dark, polished wood that seemed out of place in the budget motel. The forensics team had already dusted it for prints but found nothing useful. The scratches along its edges were deep, cutting through the varnish into the bare wood beneath. "Has anyone opened it yet?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Waiting for you, Detective," Jenkins replied. The small town of Millfield hadn't seen a proper mystery in years. Most of Sarah's cases involved domestic disputes or teenagers breaking into the abandoned paper mill. This was different. There was something about the box that made the air feel heavy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Sarah pulled on latex gloves, the soft snap breaking the silence. She knelt beside the box, running her fingers along its surface. No hinges were visible. The lid seemed to be held in place by an internal mechanism. Gently, she pressed on different parts of the box, looking for a hidden release. A soft click echoed through the room. "Got something," she murmured. The lid lifted smoothly, as if the box had been waiting to be opened. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a collection of items: a silver locket, a driver's license with a woman's photo, the name Alina Winters printed beneath it, a folded piece of yellowed newspaper, and beneath it all a small tape recorder. Sarah carefully removed each item, placing them on the plastic sheet. The locket contained a small photograph of a young woman with a child. The newspaper clipping, dated 15 years earlier, detailed the disappearance of a local woman, Alina Winters, aged 29, last seen leaving her workplace at the town library. The case had gone cold. No body was ever found. "I remember this," Jenkins said softly. "I was just a rookie when she vanished. Her daughter was only 5. Sarah picked up the tape recorder. It was old, the kind that used small cassettes, popular in the 1990s. She pressed play, not knowing what to expect. A woman's voice filled the silent room, barely above a whisper. If you're listening to this, then you found my message. My name is Alina Winters. By now, I'm probably dead. Sarah and Jenkins exchanged glances as the tape continued. He's been watching me for months. I can feel his eyes following me through the library windows in the grocery store outside my daughter's school. The police say they can't do anything without evidence, so I'm gathering it myself. There was a pause, then the sound of papers rustling. His name is Robert Caldwell. He owns this motel. I've documented everything in my journal: dates, times, photographs. I hid it all in the basement of the library behind the third bookshelf on the eastern wall. There's a loose brick. If something happens to me, please make sure my daughter is safe. He wants her too. I can see it in his eyes when he looks at her. The tape clicked off. Sarah sat back on her heels, processing the information. Robert Caldwell, she repeated. Wasn't he the previous owner of this place? Jenkins nodded slowly. Died about 5 years ago, heart attack. The motel's been through 3 owners since then. Then the current owner. Barely keeps the place running. Lives out of state, has a manager handle the day-to-day. Sarah stood up, her mind racing. We need to get to the library and find out where Alina's daughter is now. The library was a small brick building in the center of town, largely unchanged in the past 20 years. The basement housed archival materials, rarely visited except by the occasional researcher or history enthusiast. Following Alina's instructions, Sarah located the third bookshelf on the eastern wall. Jenkins held a flashlight as she ran her fingers along the bricks. Here, she said, feeling one brick shift under her touch. Behind it was a cavity containing a leather-bound journal and a manila envelope. The journal contained meticulous entries detailing Alina's observations of Robert Caldwell's behavior, including photographs taken from a distance. The envelope held additional evidence, receipts showing Caldwell's presence at locations where Alina had been, a strand of hair taped to a card, and a small key labeled Storage Unit 17. She was building a case, Sarah said, turning the pages carefully, but she never got to finish it. The final entry in the journal was dated the day before Alina disappeared. It read simply, "He knows, going to confront him tonight, left everything for Katie if I don't come back." Katie Winters, now 20 years old, lived 2 towns over, studying at the community college. When Sarah and Jenkins arrived at her apartment, she invited them in with confused politeness. "I barely remember my mother," Katie said, sitting across from them at her small kitchen table. "My grandmother raised me. She told me Mom just left one day." "We have reason to believe that wasn't the case," Sarah said gently, explaining their discovery. Katie's hands trembled as she looked through the photographs and journal entries. "All these years I thought she abandoned me," she whispered. "There's something else," Sarah added. "The storage unit key. Do you know anything about it?" Katie shook her head, but there's only one storage facility in Millfield, Grand Storage out by the highway. At Grand Storage, Unit 17 revealed the final pieces of the puzzle. Inside was a sealed plastic container holding a video camera with a tape still inside, and a manila envelope containing soil samples and what appeared to be blood-stained fabric swatches. Back at the police station, the forensics team worked through the night analyzing the evidence. The video showed Caldwell's motel from a distance, focusing on room 17, the same room where the box had been found. Alina's voice narrated softly as the camera captured Caldwell carrying large, heavy bags into the room late at night, then leaving empty-handed. The soil samples from the storage unit matched the soil behind the motel in an area that had since been paved over for additional parking. The blood on the fabric matched Alina's type, preserved in the medical records the police still had on file. 2 days later, with a warrant in hand, Sarah supervised as the concrete behind the motel was broken up. 6 feet down, wrapped in plastic sheeting, they found human remains. Dental records would later confirm they belonged to Alina Winters. In the original wooden box, which had been kept in evidence, Sarah found one final clue. A false bottom, revealed only after careful examination, contained a sealed letter addressed to Katie. "My dearest daughter," it began, "if you're reading this, I want you to know I never would have left you by choice. I hope whoever found this box has brought you answers and justice. Know that everything I did to protect you." As the case came to a close, Sarah watched Katie standing by her mother's newly marked grave in the Millfield Cemetery. Justice had come 15 years too late, but it had come. Robert Caldwell had died never facing consequences for his actions, but Alina's story was finally known. The woman who had found the box in the motel closet was never identified. Motel records showed she had checked in under the name Alina Winters, a detail that gave Sarah chills when she discovered it. Some mysteries, it seemed, would remain unsolved. In the years that followed, room 17 of the Pinewood Motel remained vacant. Not because anyone knew its history, the case had been kept relatively quiet out of respect for Katie, but because something about the room felt different, heavier, as if the walls themselves remembered what had happened there and what had been found inside the closet. A simple wooden box with scratches along the edges, as if someone inside had been trying to get out. Story 7, the apartment had been empty for years, its windows covered in dust. But as the new tenant wiped down the glass, he saw a name faintly etched into the surface. It wasn't his name. It wasn't the name of the previous tenant. And when he looked closer, he realized something worse. The scratches were on the inside. Detective Morgan Reed stood in the center of the small apartment, the late afternoon light filtering through the now clean windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. The space was mostly bare, save for a few cardboard boxes stacked neatly in one corner and the cleaning supplies scattered near the window in question. The air smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and the faint mustiness that lingered in spaces left undisturbed for too long. "So you called as soon as you found it?" Detective Reed asked, her voice steady and measured as she approached the window where Thomas Bennett, the new tenant, was standing. "Yes," Thomas replied, his finger hovering near but not touching the glass. "I was just cleaning, getting the place ready to move in properly tomorrow. That's when I noticed this." The name etched into the glass was Eliza. The letters were thin but deliberate, carved with something sharp, perhaps a ring or a key. Detective Reed leaned closer, her breath creating a small cloud of condensation on the glass that quickly faded. She took a small notebook from her pocket and made a note, the soft scratching of her pen the only sound in the quiet apartment. "And you're certain the apartment was vacant for some time before you signed the lease?" she asked, her eyes still fixed on the name in the glass. "That's what the landlord told me. Said it had been empty for almost 3 years. Some issue with the previous tenant's estate that had to be resolved." Detective Reed nodded slowly, turning to look around the space with new interest. The walls had been recently painted a soft eggshell white, the floors refinished. There was nothing to suggest the apartment's history except for that name, scratched from the inside. The following morning, Detective Reed sat at her desk in the precinct, a cup of coffee cooling beside her as she scrolled through the property records on her computer. The soft hum of fluorescent lights and distant conversations created a gentle backdrop to her research. She found that the apartment had indeed been vacant for just over 3 years. The previous tenant had been a woman named Margaret Collins, age 76, who had lived there for over 2 decades before passing away. There was no mention of anyone named Eliza. Reed dug deeper, requesting the full tenant history for the building. The document arrived in her email with a soft ping, and as she scanned through the names, a pattern began to emerge. Before Margaret Collins, a family had lived in the apartment, the Hansons. They had occupied the space for 5 years, from 1992 to 1997. The family consisted of Robert and Claire Hanson and their daughter, Elizabeth. A cold sensation settled in Reed's stomach. Elizabeth, Eliza. The detective spent the next few hours piecing together the Hanson family's story. Newspaper archives revealed that in late 1997, the family had suddenly moved away, citing a job opportunity in another state. But there were inconsistencies in the timeline, gaps that made Reed pause and take more notes, her pen moving methodically across the paper. 3 days later, Reed returned to the apartment. Thomas Bennett had moved in but agreed to meet the detective after work. The space looked different now, furnished, lived in, warm, but Reed's attention was drawn immediately to the window with the name. "I haven't cleaned it off," Thomas said, following her gaze. "It felt wrong somehow." Reed nodded, then reached into her bag and pulled out a file. "I found some information about the previous occupants," she said, her voice soft yet clear. "Before Ms. Collins, there was a family here, the Hansons. They had a daughter named Elizabeth. She would have been 14 when they lived here." Thomas sat on the edge of his new sofa, hands clasped between his knees. So it was her name on the window, but why would she scratch it from the inside? Reed took a breath, weighing her words carefully. "I spoke with a neighbor yesterday, an elderly woman who's lived in the building since the 1980s. She remembered the Hansons. She said Elizabeth Eliza was homeschooled. She rarely saw the girl outside the apartment." The detective moved to the window, looking at the name again. "I also found police reports from that time. There were 2 calls to this address, both for domestic disturbances. Both were dismissed as misunderstandings." Thomas's eyes widened slightly, understanding beginning to dawn. "The family left suddenly, according to the building records, but I checked school enrollments in the city they supposedly moved to. There's no record of Elizabeth Hanson ever enrolling." The silence in the apartment grew heavier, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the subtle ticking of a clock on Thomas's wall. Reed turned back to the window, studying the name one more time. The afternoon light caught the scratches, making them more visible, like a ghost reaching out from the past. "I've reopened an investigation," Reed said finally. "We're going to look more closely at the Hanson family, try to locate Elizabeth, and we'll be bringing in a forensic team to examine this apartment more thoroughly." Thomas nodded, his gaze also fixed on the name in the window. "Do you think she's—" Reed didn't answer immediately. In her 15 years as a detective, she had learned that sometimes silence spoke more truth than words. "I don't know," she said eventually, "but someone scratched that name from the inside, and I intend to find out why." As Reed left the apartment that evening, the setting sun cast long shadows across the room, the name on the window catching the light one last time before darkness fell. The case of Eliza Hansen had begun, a whisper from the past slowly growing louder, demanding to be heard. And somewhere in a file that would soon be reopened lay the answers to questions no one had thought to ask for over 20 years, questions about a girl who had etched her name into a window, perhaps as her final testament to a world that had forgotten she existed. Story 8. The lake had been still, undisturbed, a perfect sheet of glass reflecting the moonlight. But when the fishermen arrived at dawn, they found something chilling. A trail of wet footprints leading out of the water, deep, heavy impressions in the mud. But they stopped abruptly, disappearing into the forest. There were no returning prints. Whoever or whatever had walked out of the lake had never gone back. The small town of Millbrook had always prided itself on the tranquility of Lake Serene. For generations, it had been a place where families gathered, where children learned to swim, where elderly couples walked hand in hand along its shores as the sun set behind the pines. But on that Tuesday morning in late October, something changed in the collective consciousness of the town. A whisper began, soft as the morning mist that hovered above the water's surface. Detective Sarah Linden arrived just as the morning light was strengthening, casting long shadows across the muddy shoreline. The air was cool, heavy with moisture, carrying the earthy scent of wet soil and decaying leaves. She moved slowly, deliberately, her trained eyes scanning the scene. The footprints were large, suggesting a man's shoe, size 11 or 12. The depth of the impression indicated someone of considerable weight. What puzzled her most was the spacing slightly too wide, as if the person had been running, but the prints themselves showed no signs of haste. "How long have they been here?" she asked, her voice barely disturbing the silence that hung over the lake. The local officer, a young man with tired eyes and a coffee-stained uniform, consulted his notes. "Fishermen found them at 5:43 this morning. Said the mud was still wet around the prints. Dew hadn't settled in them yet." Sarah nodded, kneeling beside one of the impressions. She placed her hand near it, feeling the cool dampness of the earth. With careful movements, she took photographs, measured the depth, the length, the distance between each step. All the while, her mind was reconstructing the moments before these prints appeared. Who walks out of a lake in the middle of the night, and where did they go when they reached the tree line? The investigation began to unfold at the pace of honey dripping from a spoon, slow, deliberate, inexorable. Sarah requested the records of anyone reported missing in the last week. 3 names emerged: a teenage girl who had since returned home, an elderly man with dementia who had been found wandering near the highway, and Michael Reeves, a 42-year-old accountant who had failed to show up for work 3 days prior. Michael's apartment was a study in solitude. Everything was in its place, dishes cleaned and put away, bed made with hospital corners, mail sorted by sender. On his desk, a calendar with nothing written on it except for one notation: lake on the day he disappeared. His cell phone was found on his bedside table, uncharged. His car remained in the parking garage of his apartment building. The days passed with a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Sarah interviewed Michael's coworkers, who described him as quiet, efficient, unremarkable. "The kind of person you could work with for years and never really know," said his supervisor, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper nails that tapped impatiently against her desk. A search of the forest where the footprints led revealed nothing. No broken branches, no discarded clothing, no signs of struggle. It was as if whoever had emerged from the lake had simply vanished into thin air once they reached the trees. On the 5th day of the investigation, Sarah received the results of the water analysis from the lake. The report indicated elevated levels of certain minerals, particularly iron and manganese, near the area where the footprints began. This was unusual but not unprecedented. Natural springs sometimes altered the composition of lake water. What caught her attention was a small notation at the bottom of the report. Sample contains trace amounts of industrial solvent consistent with dry cleaning chemicals. This single detail changed the direction of her investigation. There was only one dry cleaning business in Millbrook, a family-owned establishment that had been operating for over 30 years. The current owner, Harold Jenkins, had taken over from his father 15 years ago. Sarah drove to Jenkins' dry cleaning under a sky heavy with the promise of rain. The shop was empty except for Harold, a tall man with stooped shoulders and hands stained with chemicals despite the protective gloves he wore. He answered her questions with a quiet directness, his eyes never quite meeting hers. Yes, he knew Michael Reeves, a regular customer, brought in shirts every other week. No, he hadn't seen him recently. Yes, the business had been struggling. Environmental regulations had made disposal of chemicals more expensive. "Where do you dispose of your waste now?" Sarah asked, her voice neutral, giving away nothing of her suspicions. "Licensed facility in the next county," Harold replied, his fingers worrying the edge of the counter. "They pick up twice a month." The investigation continued its slow unraveling. Records showed that the waste disposal company had no pickups scheduled from Jenkins' dry cleaning in the past 3 months. A former employee, speaking in hushed tones over coffee in a diner 20 miles from Millbrook, mentioned seeing Harold loading barrels into his truck late at night. "Near the lake?" Sarah asked, and the young woman nodded, her eyes darting nervously to the door. The picture began to form in Sarah's mind like a photograph developing in chemical solution. Harold struggling with mounting costs, the lake isolated at night, Michael perhaps witnessing something he shouldn't have while taking a late evening walk. The final piece came from Michael's email, finally accessed after days of legal requests. A message drafted but never sent, addressed to the Environmental Protection Agency. It detailed his concerns about contamination in Lake Serene, observations of fish dying near the western shore, the same shore where his footprints would later emerge. When Sarah returned to Jenkins' dry cleaning with a search warrant, Harold was gone. His house was empty, clothes missing from closets, toothbrush absent from the bathroom. His truck was found abandoned at a bus station 50 miles away. The case remained officially open, but as weeks turned into months, the likelihood of finding either Michael or Harold diminished. The footprints at the lake had long since been washed away by rain and time, leaving only photographs in a case file as evidence they had ever existed. Sometimes in the quiet hours of early morning, Sarah would find herself drawn back to Lake Serene. She would stand at the shore, watching the play of light on water, and wonder, had Michael confronted Harold that night? Had there been a struggle? Or had something else entirely happened, something that couldn't be explained by the careful logic of detective work? The lake kept its secrets, reflecting only the sky above and the trees that surrounded it. And occasionally, when the wind was still and the water perfectly calm, Sarah could almost imagine she saw them footprints, emerging from the depths, walking toward the unknown darkness of the forest beyond. Story 9, the first message was simple. "I know what you did." She dismissed it as a prank, but then came another. "I know where you were last night. The third message contained something worse, a photo. It was of her bedroom, taken from outside her window. In the quiet suburban town of Millfield, where streetlights cast long shadows across neatly trimmed lawns, Elena Pearson lived a life of careful routine. Her Victorian home stood slightly apart from the others, its blue paint fading in places, like a secret slowly being revealed by time. On Tuesdays, she taught English literature at the local college. On Thursdays, she volunteered at the library. And every night she closed her floral curtains precisely at 9:30, a habit as predictable as the passage of seasons. Detective Marcus Reed noticed this detail as he sat across from Elena in her living room 3 days after the messages began. The room was filled with books, their spines creating a tapestry of colors against white walls. A grandfather clock in the corner marked time with a gentle persistence, its pendulum swinging in hypnotic rhythm. Outside, autumn leaves drifted past the window, occasionally tapping against the glass like hesitant visitors. "When did you first realize someone was watching you?" Detective Reed asked, his pen hovering above a small, leather-bound notebook. His voice was low and measured, carrying the weight of 17 years on the force. The room felt smaller when he spoke. Elena's fingers traced the edge of her teacup, the porcelain cool beneath her touch. "I thought it was nothing at first," she said, her words careful and measured. "Just spam or a wrong number, but then..." Her voice trailed off as she reached for her phone, scrolling through messages with deliberate movements. The detective leaned forward slightly, his chair releasing a soft creak that seemed to echo in the stillness of the room. The scent of Earl Grey tea mingled with the mustiness of old books as he studied the messages on her screen. His expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes changed when he saw the photograph of Elena's bedroom window, the camera angle positioned from the old oak tree that stood sentinel in her backyard. "Have you noticed anything else unusual? Anyone paying particular attention to your routines?" he asked, jotting notes in handwriting that slanted slightly to the right, the ink flowing smoothly across the page. Elena's gaze drifted toward the window, where afternoon light filtered through partially drawn curtains, creating patterns on the hardwood floor. "There was something," she said after a moment of consideration. "At the college, a man I didn't recognize watching me from the parking lot. When I looked again, he was gone." The investigation unfolded like a slow-motion waltz in the days that followed. Detective Reed discovered that Elena wasn't the only one receiving messages. 2 other professors at Millfield College had reported similar incidents, cryptic texts that revealed intimate knowledge of their daily lives, photographs taken through windows, silent phone calls that came at precisely the same time each evening. In the evidence room at the Millfield Police Department, where fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the air carried the faint smell of coffee and paper, Detective Reed pinned the photographs to a corkboard. Each image told a story of invasion, a private moment observed by unseen eyes. He stood back, arms crossed, as Officer Laurel Chen entered the room, carrying a folder marked with the date. "The cell phone signals were bounced through multiple towers," she said, her voice quiet yet clear in the empty room. "Whoever's doing this knows how to hide their digital footprints." Reed nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the board. "What connects these 3 people?" he asked, more to himself than to his colleague. "What thread runs through their lives that someone would find worth pulling?" The answer came not from evidence or interrogation, but from a seemingly unrelated event. On a Thursday afternoon, as rain tapped gently against windows throughout Millfield, the library's fire alarm sounded. Among the patrons ushered outside was Elena, clutching a book to her chest like a shield. Across the street, Detective Reed noticed a figure watching the scene with unusual intensity, a man in his 30s, wearing a gray jacket with patches on the elbows. When their eyes met, the man turned away too quickly, disappearing around a corner before Reed could cross the street. But it was enough a thread had appeared in the tapestry of the case. The man's name was Oliver Whitman, a former student who had been dismissed from Millfield College 3 years earlier for academic dishonesty. All 3 professors had served on the disciplinary committee that ended his academic career. As Detective Reed discovered, Oliver had spent those 3 years building a new identity as a computer security consultant, gaining skills that allowed him to monitor, track, and infiltrate the digital lives of those he blamed for his failure. In Oliver's apartment, where the blinds were always drawn and the air smelled of instant coffee and electronics, police found elaborate maps of the professor's routines, photographs documenting their most private moments, and the equipment used to send untraceable messages. But Oliver himself was nowhere to be found. "He knows we're onto him," Reed said, standing in the empty apartment as forensic technicians carefully cataloged evidence. "He's been watching us as closely as he's been watching them." The final message came that night. On Aliner's phone, a single line of text appeared. "Some stories don't have endings." Detective Reed ordered patrols around all 3 professors' homes, officers positioned in cars with engines running quiet and heaters fighting against the autumn chill. At exactly midnight, the power went out in Aliner's neighborhood. In the sudden darkness, illuminated only by flashlights and the distant glow of backup generators coming online, Oliver Whitman was finally apprehended, not approaching Aliner's home, but leaving the town entirely, a bus ticket to another state in his pocket and a new identity prepared. When questioned in a room where the clock on the wall seemed to tick with deliberate slowness, Oliver spoke with unsettling calm. "I never planned to hurt them," he explained, his voice soft and reasonable. "I just wanted them to know what it feels like to have someone else control your story." The case of the watching stranger was officially closed. Oliver Whitman received a sentence that would keep him away from Millfield for many years. The professors installed new security systems and gradually returned to their routines. Detective Reed filed his final report, the case folder adding another layer to the archive of solved investigations. But in Millfield, where tree-lined streets grow dark at night and windows become mirrors reflecting the inside to those who know where to look, Alina Pearson still closes her curtains at exactly 9:30. Sometimes she pauses for a moment before drawing them shut, her gaze lingering on the darkness beyond the glass. And sometimes, just sometimes, she has the unsettling feeling that despite everything, she is still being watched. Because some stories, once started, never truly end, they just fade into the background, waiting for the right moment to continue. Story 10, renovations always bring forth the unexpected. Old relics of the past resurface from their hiding places under layers of dust and time. In the case of Sarah and Michael, their venture into renovating their newly acquired Victorian-era home took a chilling turn. Beneath the floorboards lay a folded letter, its yellowed paper frail and ink faded, but its warning clear: don't trust the one who knocked. Before the couple could process the ominous message, 3 sharp knocks pierced the silence of the house, sending shivers down their spines. Detective Alina Reed, a seasoned investigator, arrived on the scene with her partner, the exposed floorboards revealing a hidden cavity below. With gloved hands, she carefully retrieved the note, knowing that the couple's inadvertent touch had tainted potential evidence. As Reed delved deeper into the mystery, it became apparent that the house held secrets far darker than its ornate moldings and rich history suggested. The previous owners, the Hargrove family, had left behind a legacy of enigma and tragedy. Margaret Hargrove, the last resident, had lived a reclusive life until her passing, leaving behind no enemies or suspicious circumstances surrounding her death. However, the discovery of the cryptic note hinted at a hidden chapter in the Hargroves' lives. Forensic analysis dated the letter back 2 decades, during a time of distress and fear for Margaret and her late husband, Franklin. Reed's investigation unearthed unsettling truths about Franklin's descent into paranoia, possibly fueled by mounting gambling debts and the looming presence of a mysterious collector who came knocking always 3 raps at the door. A breakthrough came when Reed interviewed Margaret's sister, who revealed the true source of Margaret's fear. The collector, Victor Mercer, a notorious loan shark who had vanished without a trace years ago. The pieces of the puzzle started falling into place as the forensic team uncovered a dark secret hidden beneath the house, a male skeleton, identified as Victor Mercer, buried beneath the foundation. Margaret's diaries, discovered in the attic, provided a haunting account of the events that transpired. Franklin's confrontation with Mercer had led to a deadly altercation, resulting in Mercer's demise and a web of deceit that Margaret carried with her in silence. The knocking that haunted her in her final years echoed the specter of guilt and fear that lingered within the walls of the house. With the truth unveiled and justice belatedly served, Sarah and Michael made the decision to part ways with the house, unable to bear the weight of its dark history. The once promising renovations came to a halt, leaving the house vacant and steeped in whispers of the past. Local legends spoke of eerie occurrences in the dead of night, where the echoes of 3 distinct knocks reverberated through the empty halls, a reminder of the untold secrets that lay buried beneath. Detective Reed closed the case with a heavy heart, acknowledging that some mysteries defy resolution, leaving behind a lingering sense of ambiguity and unanswered questions. The letter, preserved in evidence storage, bore a chilling message that lingered in the air like a ghostly whisper: "Don't trust the one who knocked." Margaret's story remained a haunting enigma, a tale of betrayal and tragedy that continued to echo through the corridors of time, a reminder that some secrets are destined to remain shrouded in darkness forever. Story 11. The tale began innocently enough, with new tenants Michael and Sarah Klein embarking on a journey of discovery within their Victorian-era home. What started as a simple renovation project soon unraveled into a mystery shrouded in layers of peeling wallpaper. As they peeled back the damaged sections, they uncovered a haunting revelation: a name, repeated obsessively across the wall in frantic ink strokes. Eleanor Winters, a name that whispered of secrets long forgotten, of a past intertwined with their present in unsettling ways. Intrigued and unsettled, Michael and Sarah delved deeper, their curiosity leading them down a rabbit hole of forgotten history. The name Eleanor Winters, seemingly lost to time, resurfaced in an online search as a missing person from decades past. The woman who sold them the house, Margaret Cavendish, bore an uncanny resemblance to the missing Eleanor. A coincidence too eerie to ignore, a thread connecting the past to the present in inexplicable ways. Their once charming home transformed into a place of mystery and intrigue as they uncovered hidden truths buried within its walls. The layers of wallpaper peeled away not just to reveal outdated patterns, but to expose a dark secret lingering beneath the surface. As they unearthed the story of Eleanor Winters, a missing woman with ties to their very home, their obsession grew. Nights turned into investigations, the renovation project put on hold as they sought answers to questions long forgotten. The retired detective's revelations added fuel to their fire, painting a picture of a cold case that had languished for decades. Aliner's disappearance, shrouded in mystery, now intertwined with the enigmatic Margaret Cavendish who had vanished into thin air. Forensic teams descended upon their home, turning it into a scene of intrigue and scrutiny. The walls, once silent witnesses, now spoke volumes through the inked name of Aliner Winters, a ghostly presence lingering in the air. And then a chilling discovery beneath the floorboards, a hidden cache of identities, each bearing the face of a woman lost to time. Aliner, Margaret, and Rebecca Eldridge, a web of personas spun by a fractured mind seeking solace in a tangled web of deceit. The truth, when finally unveiled, shattered the fragile peace of their dream home. Aliner's remains unearthed from the backyard, a grim reminder of a crime long buried but never forgotten. Rebecca Eldridge, the mastermind behind the elaborate charade, was unmasked in a moment of reckoning. Her fractured psyche laid bare, her guilt etched into the walls she once called home. For Michael and Sarah, the house that had drawn them in with its charm now stood as a monument to tragedy, a place where the past bled into the present in ways they could never have imagined. As they watched the sun set from their front porch, the shadows lengthened, casting a pall over their once beloved home. The walls whispered tales of a bygone era, of secrets buried deep within the foundation, waiting to be unearthed by those brave enough to listen. And so, as the night descended, enveloping them in its embrace, Michael and Sarah found themselves drifting into a restless slumber, haunted by the echoes of a story that refused to be forgotten. Story 12. The realtor's listing made no mention of a basement. The blueprints offered no clue to its existence. Yet, as the family peeled back the worn carpet, a hidden door emerged, its handle coated in rust. 3 sets of hands strained to pry it open, revealing a gust of stagnant air heavy with the fragrance of moist soil. Descending the steps into darkness, they braced for storage but were met with a solitary chair beneath a swaying light bulb, and there on the wall hung a collection of photographs of them. The Mercer family settled into the suburban abode during the wintry veil of early nights and stark, leafless trees. The aged 2-story home, with its weathered siding and creaking floors, exuded character and history, qualities they had sought. Little did they anticipate the depth of history within the house or the force with which it would converge with their present. Detective Sarah Connors arrived at the property with her partner, the crime scene unit already cordoning off the area with fluttering yellow tape. Mrs. Mercer's voice quivered over the phone as she recounted the discovery beneath their living room floor. "We must document everything before anyone else descends," Connors directed, slipping on latex gloves with practiced ease. Camera flashes punctuated the stairwell as the forensic team captured the scene. The wooden steps moaned beneath their weight. The small basement, akin to a standard bedroom, featured concrete walls painted a dull gray. A solitary chair was bolted to the floor at the room's center, with a bare bulb casting stark shadows that danced in the unseen breeze. However, it was the line of photographs that commanded attention. 37 images meticulously arranged in chronological order. "These date back nearly 4 weeks," Connor's partner remarked, studying the timestamps inscribed on the photo backs. "Look at this one, Mrs. Mercer asleep on the couch, Mr. Mercer at the kitchen table, the kids in their rooms." Investigations yielded no signs of forced entry, no shattered windows or tampered locks. The security system had remained dormant. Nothing was stolen, only privacy and the sense of security the family once held. Forensics unearthed multiple fingerprints, most belonging to past property owners. Records revealed the house had changed hands 6 times in the past decade, each family departing in under a year, selling at diminishing prices. None had ever mentioned stumbling upon a basement. "We need to interview every prior owner," Connors ordered, flipping through her notepad. The case grew more unsettling as they delved into the history. Discrepancies marred the property records, blueprints altered between sales, permits retracted, inspection reports redacted. A breakthrough emerged during an interview with the contractor who had renovated the house 7 years prior. His complexion drained upon seeing photos of the basement. "That room is non-existent," he asserted, hands quivering. "I stripped that place to its bones. No basement, no door, just soil and concrete beneath the living room." Data extracted from a concealed memory card within the light fixture unraveled hundreds more images, not solely of the Mercers, but of past families. Children slumbering, parents bickering, intimate moments, mundane routines, all captured by an intruder lurking beyond their awareness. The case darkened further upon the recovery of audio files from a weatherproof box buried in the basement's corner. Voice recordings from the master bedroom, kitchen, living room. The crisp quality hinted at hidden microphones dispersed throughout the house, undetected during the initial search. "We must rip apart every wall," Connors urged, tension lacing her voice. "Inspect air vents, light fixtures, electrical outlets. The perpetrator has been observing these families for years." Behind the photograph wall, investigators unearthed a narrow passageway leading to a monitoring station, a desk, a chair, a laptop linked to wireless cameras, and a journal brimming with detailed observations of each reciting family's habits, schedules, disputes, vulnerabilities. The penmanship aligned with samples from the house's original builder, Edward Kelvin, who purportedly perished during its construction, a fact that grew dubious as the investigation unfolded. No trace of a death certificate or funeral arrangements surfaced. Edward Kelvin had been expunged from official records. The journal's final entries spiraled into madness. Phrases like "they never looked down" and "they never see me" recurred. The ultimate page bore one sentence: "The next family arrives tomorrow." Fingerprint analysis affirmed the detectives' growing suspicion. Edward Kelvin hadn't vacated the home he constructed. Instead, he retreated into its concealed recesses, erecting a maze of vantage points from which to spy on the families who believed themselves solitary. The manhunt spanned 3 days, culminating in Kelvin's discovery curled within a crawlspace amid the second-floor chambers, his physique slender and agile from navigating the secret passages he'd carved within the walls. Squinting against the flashlight beams, his eyes recoiled from direct light. During interrogation, Kelvin depicted the families as actors in his private theater, observing them with the detachment of a scientist studying specimens. He professed no physical intrusion, theft, or direct disruption of their lives, only observation, documentation. "They welcomed me in," he murmured to the investigators, his tone genteel. "They signed the contracts, they became mine." Psychiatric evaluations unveiled Kelvin's severe delusions, portraying himself as the house's guardian rather than an interloper. The families were transient guests in what he deemed his eternal abode. The Mercers never returned, abandoning their possessions and fleeing solely with packed suitcases. The house stood vacant as legal proceedings unfolded. The trial unmasked the vastness of Kelvin's surveillance network, hidden chambers accessible through crawl spaces, embedded observation points within the very structure, all methodically arranged prior to the initial brick. Upon the jury's verdict, Kelvin remained impassive, having retreated into the labyrinth of his psyche, where he could still traverse the unseen corridors of the now-erased house. Eventually, the property was razed, its earth excavated and replaced, yet for the former inhabitants, the violation lingered. They were haunted not by what was taken, but by what lay concealed, watching, eavesdropping, documenting their intimate moments from within walls they trusted for protection. In quiet reveries, they sometimes cast a glance at air vents, light fixtures, the junctures where walls met ceilings, pondering if they were truly solitary now, wondering if they had ever been. Story 13. In the quiet stillness of a forgotten house, a phone sat on the dusty counter, its screen softly glowing. Detective Morgan Reed listened intently to the playback of a mysterious call that had just come through, filled with static and whispers. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman, frantic and desperate, uttering 5 haunting words before the line fell silent. He's here. He. The abandoned property had once belonged to the Sullivan family, but now stood empty, a relic of the past. No signs of forced entry, no disturbances to be found. Detective Reed, along with her partner Detective Walsh, delved into the unsettling case that seemed to defy logic. A background check revealed that the number traced back to Catherine Sullivan, the deceased daughter of the former owners. She had passed away in a tragic accident 3 years prior, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. The phone call from the abandoned house, made at the exact time of Catherine's death, sent shivers down the detectives' spines. As they combed through the evidence, they found no fingerprints, no footprints, no logical explanation for the chilling call. The forensic team was at a loss, unable to unravel the mystery that surrounded them. Interviews with Catherine's family and acquaintances painted a picture of a young woman caught in a web of fear and manipulation. Her journal, unearthed by her grieving mother, revealed a harrowing tale of control and eventual terror at the hands of her boyfriend, Mark Jennings. Mark's facade crumbled under the weight of the evidence against him. His alibi shattered, his lies exposed. It became clear that the accident that claimed Catherine's life was not, as it seemed, a sinister truth buried beneath layers of deceit. With the discovery of Catherine's buried phone and the revelation of deleted texts, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Mark's twisted game of deception, his elaborate ruse to frame Catherine as a vengeful spirit, was laid bare for all to see. In a chilling twist of fate, Mark was found sitting in the very house where his crimes had been uncovered. His delusions of outwitting the law shattered as justice finally caught up to him. As the courtroom verdict resounded, Catherine's mother clung to her daughter's journal, a testament to the unwavering strength of a voice silenced too soon. The phone from the abandoned house, now a relic of a dark chapter closed, but not forgotten. In the hushed halls of the evidence locker, a phantom ring echoes through the silence, a reminder that even in death, the truth will always find a way to be heard. Catherine's story, a beacon of resilience and justice, a whisper in the night that refuses to be silenced. Story 14. They stumbled upon it in the attic, nestled beneath a worn blanket, a porcelain doll, fragile and aged, with its wide, unblinking blue eyes painted on. Sarah and Michael, a young couple, shared a chuckle at the unexpected find, just another forgotten relic of the past. Yet that night a strange sensation lingered in the air as they settled into bed. The atmosphere grew heavier, the silence stretching into an eerie stillness. And when morning broke, the doll was no longer in the attic. It now perched at the foot of their bed. Sarah and Michael had acquired the Victorian house at auction, captivated by its intricate woodwork and enigmatic allure, despite whispers of its troubled history. They were drawn to the tales woven into its very foundation, unaware that they would soon become entwined in its narrative. One brisk autumn morning, Detective Rachel Winters received a call. The scene she encountered was chilling. The female victim, positioned in a contorted manner in the master bedroom, eyes frozen wide in terror, while the male victim seemed to have been caught in a desperate attempt to flee. The setting was pristine, devoid of forced entry or signs of a struggle beyond the haunting poses of the deceased. Quietly, Detective Winters observed, the placement seems intentional, almost like a doll plucked from a display case, as she meticulously documented every detail with her recorder. The investigation delved into the accounts of neighbors, unveiling unsettling glimpses, a shadow flitting behind an upper window, childish laughter echoing from the vacant abode in the dead of night. Each narrative added a layer of unease to the growing mystery. Forensic analysis revealed traces of vintage fabrics throughout the house, resembling those used in antique doll attire. The fibers clustered around the victims and the attic, a peculiar detail that heightened the enigma. More perplexing was the absence of external DNA or fingerprints, as if the perpetrator existed beyond the physical realm. Tracing the property's history unveiled a sinister pattern. Prior owners had met untimely fates under cryptic circumstances, mirroring the current tragedy. A newspaper clipping hinted at a doll maker who once resided in the house, his final creation rumored to be a replica of his deceased daughter. As Detective Winters delved further, a revelation emerged connecting the victims. They had all made alterations to the attic where the doll had been discovered. Old photographs unearthed from a hidden compartment hinted at the doll's eerie mobility, its presence seemingly shifting between snapshots. Infrared scans unveiled ghostly handprints traversing from the attic to the master bedroom, accompanied by a mysterious residue blending porcelain dust with unidentifiable organic matter. The investigation took a macabre turn when a distant relative of the doll maker shared chilling lore of spirits infused into his creations, hinting at a dark, ritualistic past. The case reached an impasse with no tangible suspects or logical explanations to reconcile the inexplicable evidence. Detective Winters chose to retain the doll as evidence, safeguarding it in a secure cabinet at the station. However, the following day, the doll vanished from its confinement, leaving behind a bewildered but unscathed detective with no recollection of the events. The house exchanged hands once more, its grim history overshadowing its architectural grandeur. The new occupants discovered the attic barren save for a neatly folded blanket, the doll nowhere to be found. Sarah and Michael's tragic demise joined the ranks of unsolved mysteries, occasionally whispered about in the precinct's corridors. Rumors circulated of fleeting glimpses of the doll in storage, though official records denied its existence. Detective Winters bid an early farewell, citing personal motives, yet preserving a haunting memento, a photograph of the doll maker and his collection, sealed within an envelope marked "Never Open." The new inhabitants reported no disturbances, opting to leave the attic undisturbed. Yet on silent nights, whispers emerged from the neighborhood, a fleeting shadow behind the attic window, the soft laughter of a child drifting through the air. Story 15. The old apartment exuded a sense of history, its walls holding secrets whispered through time. The heating system groaned, the pipes rattled routine sounds that blended into the background of everyday life, or so she thought, until that moment when a faint yet unmistakable voice drifted through the vents, weaving its way into her consciousness. It wasn't the typical noise of a neighbor's conversation, it was a whisper, calling out her name in a haunting melody. Intrigued and unnerved, she leaned closer, her heart quickening its pace. As she pressed her ear against the cold grate, a rush of icy air brushed against her skin, followed by a soft, almost playful declaration, "I know you can hear me." In the midst of the empty apartment, Detective Morgan Shaw stood, a solitary figure surrounded by the remnants of a chilling mystery. Her gaze fixed on the rusted vent cover, forcibly removed from its place on the wall. The forensic team moved with precision, capturing every detail with their cameras, freezing the scene in time. Alina Reeves, the missing woman whose fate had led them here, had been gone for 7 long days before anyone noticed her absence. The building's management had dismissed her claims of voices in the vents, attributing them to the quirks of the aging heating system. Officer Patel recited from his notes, recounting Alina's concerns about the whispers that plagued her. Shaw knelt by the vent, tracing the frantic scratch marks that marred its edges, evidence of a desperate struggle from within. Alina, a beloved kindergarten teacher with a penchant for nurturing life, had displayed signs of paranoia in the days leading up to her disappearance. Her sister's trembling voice revealed the depth of Alina's distress, the belief that unseen eyes watched her every move, that voices spoke to her from the shadows. The apartment bore witness to Alina's fears, from the neatness of her bed to the chair positioned beneath the vent, a silent sentinel to the whispered conversations that only she could hear. The fibers in the vent grating, the foreign fingerprint, all painted a portrait of a sinister presence lurking within the walls. As Shaw delved deeper into the case, a disturbing pattern emerged. Previous tenants had fled the apartment, each haunted by inexplicable noises and spectral voices. Harold Weber, the enigmatic building superintendent, remained a constant figure in the residents' narratives, his calm facade masking a darker truth. The discovery of a hidden passage within Alina's bathroom unveiled a realm of shadows and secrets concealed within the building's structure. A clandestine existence unfolded before their eyes, a stalker living within the walls, a phantom orchestrating a macabre symphony of whispers and surveillance. Weber's meticulously kept records, his digital shrine to his victims, exposed the extent of his twisted obsession. The artifacts found in his possession, remnants of lives intruded upon, echoed the horror of his deeds. Caught in the act of escape, Weber's serene demeanor belied the madness that lurked within him. His cryptic words to Shaw hinted at a deeper connection to the building, a belief that he was a conduit for the whispers that haunted its halls. The trial that followed unveiled the depths of Weber's depravity, his calculated actions painting a portrait of a predator lurking in plain sight. The jury's swift verdict sealed his fate, yet his parting words echoed with a chilling certainty the whispers would endure, the building's memories etched in stone. Now the vacant apartment building stands as a testament to the darkness that once dwelled within its walls. Despite efforts to erase the past, the echoes of the past linger, carried on the sighs of the wind that whispers through the vents. The residents, new and unaware, sense a presence that defies explanation, a reminder that some secrets refuse to be buried, that some voices never truly fade away. The building's past whispers, a haunting lullaby that drifts through the night, a melody of mystery and dread that lingers in the shadows, waiting to be heard once more. Story 16, the Polaroid lay still, a relic of bygone days capturing a birthday celebration lost to memory. Faces frozen in smiles, candles flickering innocently, nothing out of the ordinary at first glance. Yet, as the daughter sifted through the box of aged photographs left behind by her late mother, she noticed it. A presence lingering in the background of every image, just beyond the jovial group. A man shrouded in shadows, standing on the periphery, just outside the warm glow of the candles. He was not a familiar face, not a member of the family. No recollection existed of him being present, and yet, with each photo, he crept closer. Sarah Winters stumbled upon the collection while clearing out her mother's attic following the funeral. A simple cardboard box labeled Memories unveiled a treasure trove of faded snapshots capturing moments of familial joy from her childhood. What should have brought solace and nostalgia instead birthed a creeping dread. In the initial photo, he was a mere whisper of a silhouette, a mysterious figure lingering at the edge of the frame during her 7th birthday bash. The dark specter loomed near the glass door, features obscured, observing. In the subsequent photo, taken mere moments later, he had stealthily moved inside. By the 3rd snapshot, he stood ominously behind her uncle, unnoticed by all captured in the frame. Trembling, Sarah reached out to her father, her voice quivering as she relayed her unsettling find. "Dad, do you know who this man is in the background of all these photos?" A pregnant pause followed her inquiry, then a sharp inhale. "What man? There shouldn't be anyone other than family members." Digital copies of the Polaroids were swiftly dispatched to her father, prompting an urgent call back. His usually composed voice shook as he uttered, "This can't be real. We would have noticed a stranger." Detective Marcus Reed sat across from Sarah, a sea of photographs spread out before him on the precinct desk. Raindrops tapped rhythmically against the windows, casting dancing shadows over the haunting evidence. The seasoned detective's weathered hands navigated through the images with precision, his gaze narrowing. "And no one recognized this individual?" he inquired, his voice a blend of neutrality and intrigue. "No one," Sarah affirmed, but observed the progression. She meticulously arranged the photos in chronological order. Leaning in, the detective's chair creaked softly under his weight. What initially seemed like unfounded paranoia began to take tangible form before his eyes. The mysterious figure advanced methodically through the festivities, inching closer to the innocent children. In the final photo, he loomed directly behind Sarah's younger self, a pale hand outstretched toward her shoulder, just beyond the frame. "Perhaps the photographer," Reed proposed, though doubt tinged his tone. "My mother was the one taking these photos. She set the timer and joined the group. Copies were made, a case file opened. Within days, every living attendee of the party was contacted. No one recalled the enigmatic man, no hired help, no uninvited guests. The property, secluded in the countryside, had been chosen specifically for its privacy." Facial recognition software faltered. The figure remained strategically veiled in each snapshot, as if keenly aware of the camera's lens. Yet, a sense of practiced intent emanated from his posture. The investigation teetered on a standstill until Sarah uncovered additional photos in other family albums. Diverse gatherings, various years. Yet the same mysterious figure lingered, a ghostly presence always on the fringe, forever overlooked in the moment. A A tech specialist delved into the images, stripping away decades of decay. Under the harsh glow of digital scrutiny, details emerged: a scar on the wrist, a peculiar ring, a faint reflection in a window hinting at facial features previously obscured by darkness. A breakthrough surfaced from dental records, the teeth visible in one enhanced photo aligned with those of Robert Keller, a maintenance worker who had vanished after being questioned in connection to 3 unsolved child abductions spanning the region, cases that had long grown cold. Cases that coincided with the dates of the gatherings immortalized in the photographs. Keller had been employed by the company responsible for maintaining the vacation property where Sarah's birthday festivities had unfolded. Possessing master keys to multiple rental properties in the vicinity, properties that had hosted other families, families whose children had mysteriously disappeared. As authorities excavated the grounds of Keller's former home, they unearthed poignant relics buried beneath the concrete. A hair clip matching the description of a missing girl's accessory. A toy car once cherished by a vanished boy following a family reunion. A bracelet that Sarah recognized as her own keepsake she had long believed lost in the mists of her childhood. Alone in her apartment, surrounded by the damning photos that had unveiled decades of concealed horrors, Sarah received a call from the detective. Remains discovered near one of the vacation properties had been identified through DNA analysis as belonging to one of the missing children. Her gaze lingered on the final birthday photo. The flickering candles bathed her family's faces in a golden aura, frozen in a moment of jubilation. And there behind her youthful self, partially veiled in shadow but undeniably present, stood the mysterious figure, patient, calculating, invisible to all revelers in that snapshot of bliss. The revelation intertwined unsolved mysteries across generations. Families received closure, albeit not the kind they had prayed for. The shadow in the family photos had been exposed to the light of justice, his presence finally acknowledged after years of lurking in plain view. Gathering the photos, Sarah returned them to their box, a repository of evidence. A testament to the chilling truth that sometimes the most perilous threats are those captured on film yet unseen by the naked eye, phantom figures that drift through celebrations unnoticed, leaving only the faintest trace of their passage through frozen moments of time. Story 17: The Whispers of the Abandoned House. In the twilight hours before the arrival of their first child, a young couple decided to bring new life to the nursery of their Victorian-style home. The faded blue walls held a history of whispers waiting to be uncovered. As the expectant mother applied the first strokes of white paint, a hidden message emerged from beneath the layers, a cryptic warning: "Don't let it hear you." Her heart skipped a beat as she stepped back, only to find tiny handprints imprinted in the fresh paint, too high for any child's reach. The nursery of the Morgan residence had become the epicenter of a mystery that would later be known as the Whispering House case. Detective Sarah Klein, with a notebook clutched in her hand, arrived at the eerie abode. The pregnant homeowner greeted her, exhaustion evident in her eyes and tremors in her voice. She recounted the unsettling discovery of the message and handprints left by unseen visitors. The detective delved into the history of the house, uncovering a trail of transient occupants and disturbing incidents involving children who had resided within its walls. Each family had been plagued by whispers, unseen eyes, and eerie occurrences, culminating in the ominous writings on the nursery walls. Further investigation revealed a dark past linked to Alina Blackwood, the enigmatic former owner who had operated an orphanage on the premises. 5 children had vanished under her care, their fate shrouded in mystery until the grim discovery beneath the basement floor. The forensic examination unveiled a circle of small remains, confirming the tragic end of the orphans who had once called the house their temporary sanctuary. The children's spirits seemed to linger within the confines of the nursery, their desperate messages etched into the very essence of the home. Despite the closure brought by the identification of the victims and the burial of their remains, an unsettling presence persisted within the abandoned house. The nursery walls, now demolished, had held secrets that transcended time and space, their echoes reverberating through the rubble. Detective Klein, haunted by the spectral handprints illuminated by luminol, closed the case with a heavy heart. The house, condemned and forsaken, stood as a silent witness to the unfathomable events that had unfolded within its walls. As night fell over the desolate property, a faint whisper carried on the breeze, a reminder that some mysteries defy explanation and some spirits refuse to be silenced. The legacy of the whispering house endured, a chilling testament to the lingering echoes of the past. Story 18. The worn envelope with its aged edges tinged in yellow bore a fresh stamp as if it had just embarked on its journey. With cautious hands, the detective unfolded its contents. Within lay a solitary sheet of paper bearing a message typed hastily in an uneven, hurried font. "I am sorry for what I did." The paper felt damp, carrying a faint scent of iron that lingered in the air. A reddish smear along the bottom edge caught their attention, distinct from the ink on the page. Detective Sarah Morgan, with practiced precision, secured the letter in an evidence bag, her gloved fingers mindful of the delicate task at hand. The forensics team's findings confirmed Morgan's suspicions. The reddish stain was indeed human blood, matching the DNA from an unsolved homicide case that had plagued the department for years. The victim, a young journalist named Rebecca Warren, had been discovered in her apartment with multiple stab wounds. Her laptop was missing, her notes strewn across the floor, hinting that the attack might have been linked to an investigative piece she was pursuing. Despite exhaustive interviews and countless hours of investigation, the case had grown cold. Now, a letter had materialized at the police department, simply addressed to the Homicide Division. Scant fingerprints adorned the paper and envelope, mere smudges hinting that the sender had taken care to don gloves. The postmark provided a rare light after months of stagnation. Morgan gathered her team in the dimly lit briefing room, where crime scene photos, timelines, and suspect profiles adorned the walls, each a thread leading nowhere. Pinning the image of the letter at the heart of the board, she declared, "This changes everything. Our culprit shows remorse." Detective James Chen, Morgan's steadfast partner since the case's inception, scrutinized the letter. "Or perhaps they wished to deceive us into believing so," he countered. "The blood could be a theatrical touch, a taunt." The forensics team traced the unique impression patterns of the typewriter to a model long out of production. Rare, yet not unattainable, they embarked on a quest, reaching out to antique shops and collectors across the region. As the investigation gained traction, they delved into Rebecca's life. Described by her editor as resolute and dedicated to unveiling corruption, her latest assignment delved into a wealthy family enmeshed in local politics. Following the recent demise of the family patriarch, discord over the inheritance reigned among the siblings, accusations of manipulation swirling. Interviews with Rebecca's boyfriend, Michael Barnes, unveiled subtle shifts in his demeanor upon the letter's revelation, anxious glances, a tremor in his hands. Rebecca spoke of being followed, he confessed during the latest interrogation. I dismissed it as paranoia fueled by her investigation. I should have listened. Amidst this line of inquiry, a second letter arrived, bearing the same typewritten script and bloodstains. Its message extended. She unearthed too much about the family, the inheritance, the patriarch's demise. It was never my intent for things to escalate to that extent. The trail led to the mansion of the deceased patriarch, where the eldest son, Richard, possessed an array of antiquities, including vintage typewriters. His responses regarding the typewriters seemed rehearsed, polished beyond authenticity. A breakthrough emerged when microscopic fibers on the envelopes aligned with custom stationery exclusive to the family's youngest daughter, Eleanor. Under scrutiny, Eleanor disclosed Richard's request to utilize her stationery a month prior. A search of Richard's abode uncovered a concealed chamber housing newspaper clippings of Rebecca, surveillance snapshots, and a vintage typewriter identical to the one employed for the letters. DNA analysis confirmed the blood as Rebecca's. Unexpectedly, a financial link between Richard and Michael surfaced in bank records, indicating substantial payments preceding Rebecca's demise. Confronted, Michael crumbled. Rebecca discovered evidence implicating Richard in his father's poisoning to expedite his inheritance, Michael confessed. I informed Richard of her findings, hoping to dissuade her from pursuing the story. I never imagined he would resort to murder. Eleanor stepped forth with a pivotal recording, capturing a dialogue between Richard and Michael, plotting Rebecca's fate. Richard's voice rang clear. She must be silenced permanently. Richard's apprehension transpired as he attempted to flee. The prosecution hinged their case on the letters, the typewriter, financial transactions, and Eleanor's recording. Opting for a plea deal, Michael agreed to testify. Throughout the trial, Richard maintained his innocence, ascribing blame to Michael's machinations. Yet the evidence stood unyielding. The jurors swiftly returned a guilty verdict after a brief deliberation. As Richard faced incarceration, Detective Morgan approached Rebecca's grieving parents in the courtroom. Though words could not resurrect their daughter, the verdict offered a semblance of closure. The blood-stained letters endured in evidence storage, a poignant reminder that even the most meticulously orchestrated crimes leave traces, and that remorse, whether genuine or strategic, can unravel those convinced of executing the perfect crime. The saga of Rebecca Warren transcended into a cornerstone of detective education, underscoring that breakthroughs may arise not solely from cutting-edge forensics, but from relics like an archaic typewriter and the burden of guilt weighing upon a killer's soul. Story 19. In a place where memories mingled with dust and shadows, she ventured reluctantly. The storm had forced her to confront the attic, a realm of forgotten treasures cloaked in cobwebs. Among the relics of time gone by stood an old dollhouse, its miniature furniture arranged with eerie precision. But within its tiny rooms, a disquieting revelation awaited her. The figures inside were not lifeless dolls, but intricately carved replicas of her own kin. Each tiny likeness mirrored her family members down to the smallest detail, frozen in time. However, one figure stood apart, the figure meant to represent her, standing ominously by the attic entrance. Rebecca Morgan traced a trembling finger over the dollhouse's roof, feeling the indention where the miniature version of herself stood. A chill crept through her, separate from the icy draft whispering through the attic's rafters. The dollhouse's presence defied logic. This wasn't her childhood abode, but a rented dwelling where her family had recently settled. Distressed by the unsettling discovery, Rebecca reached out to the authorities in urgency, seeking answers to the mysteries that loomed within the dollhouse's intricate walls. Law enforcement responded swiftly, finding a family in turmoil, reluctant to return to the attic's eerie sanctum. Detective Sarah Harmon, the lead investigator, initially viewed the situation as a mere prank or a product of the family's adjusting minds in a new environment. Yet the meticulous craftsmanship of the dollhouse figurines left an indelible impression on her. Each miniature sculpture encapsulated unique features of the family members: the father's receding hairline, the son's favored hoodie, even the mother's subtle birthmark. As the inquiry progressed, forensic experts uncovered fingerprints on the dollhouse belonging to no member of the household. More unsettling were the microscopic cameras embedded within the miniature figure's eyes, all linked to a hidden surveillance system concealed beneath the dollhouse. Reviewing the Morgan family's movements revealed a disconcerting pattern. The miniature figures didn't just mimic their positions on the night in question, but mirrored their actions on various days, implying a prolonged observation of their daily routines. Detective Harmon reflected, it became evident that this was no ordinary case of surveillance, but a manifestation of obsessive behavior rarely encountered in criminal studies. The investigation took a pivotal turn upon discovering a concealed entrance to a basement hideaway behind a pantry wall. Within this covert domain, investigators unearthed evidence of an unknown occupant who had dwelled beneath the family's feet even before their arrival. Remnants of consumed food, discarded bottles, and a makeshift sleeping arrangement suggested a clandestine presence lurking beneath the floorboards for weeks. Perplexingly, there were no signs of forced entry, puzzling authorities further. Property records unveiled that the house had sat vacant for an extended period before the Morgans' occupancy. The former owners, an elderly couple, had passed away within a short span, leaving their son to oversee the property's sale and subsequent rental. Neighbors offered little insight, one elderly resident recalling faint lights emanating from the residence during its unoccupied phase. The breakthrough emerged through digital scrutiny. Tracing the surveillance system's transmission led investigators to a remote apartment across town. Inside, a chilling tableau unfolded, walls adorned with photographs of the Morgan family and past residents, alongside journals meticulously chronicling their daily lives. Most chillingly, a workshop housed numerous unfinished dollhouses, each representing distinct homes in the vicinity. The apartment belonged to Martin Wells, the son of the former homeowners, whose financial woes had mounted following his parents' demise. Instead of selling the property outright, he had fashioned a covert living space to monitor unsuspecting tenants while reaping rental revenue. A forensic psychologist elucidated, the dollhouse became his realm of control, each figurine symbolizing a subject of his surveillance. Rebecca's figure by the attic entrance wasn't a threat, but an acknowledgement of her discovery. During interrogation, Wells remained disturbingly composed, attributing his actions to a need to oversee his cherished home and its residents. His fixation stemmed from an inability to accept the loss of his childhood abode, compelling him to orchestrate an elaborate scheme to retain dominion over it. The Morgans chose never to return to the house, haunted by the realization that they had been unwitting pawns in a twisted game of voyeurism. Rebecca reflected, the dollhouse wasn't the true horror. It was the revelation that we were mere playthings in a malevolent observer's hands. Martin Wells faced a litany of charges encompassing stalking, privacy intrusion, illicit surveillance, and unlawful entry. His sentencing underscored the profound violation inflicted upon the Morgan family, as the judge denounced his infringement on their sanctity and autonomy. The case prompted a reevaluation of real estate protocols regarding property disclosures and agents' obligations to ensure thorough property inspections before new tenants' arrival. Wells' journals hinted at a prolonged history of covert habitation, suggesting a sinister legacy had lain dormant until Rebecca's discovery. The Morgans relocated far from the scene of their torment, yet Rebecca confessed to lingering fears of being watched, a spectral echo of past trespasses. She banished all remnants of doll houses from their new haven, haunted by the lingering specter of an unseen observer manipulating her miniature likeness in unseen realms. Story 20. The town harbored a secret, whispered only in the wind that rustled through the dense woods where a solitary house stood, shrouded in mystery. Its presence was like a forgotten memory, its windows dark, its porch weary with the weight of time. No one laid claim to it, no one recalled its origins. But one fateful day, a group of hikers strayed too close, drawn by an unseen force. They beheld a chilling sight, names etched into the wooden walls, carved deep like ancient runes. And at the very bottom, fresh and untouched, was a name unfamiliar to them all, until a tremulous voice broke the silence. That name, it's mine. In the dead of night, a call came in, a routine report of trespassing. The voice belonged to Mason Wright, the intrepid hiker who had stumbled upon his own name carved into the abandoned house. Responding officers anticipated a simple case of mischief, a youthful prank gone awry, but what awaited them defied logic and reason. Detective Sarah Keller arrived as darkness cloaked the forest in its embrace. Her flashlight pierced the shadows, revealing the weathered facade of the house. The names 27 in total etched vertically on the eastern wall, some fading into obscurity, others sharp as if freshly carved, and at the end, Mason Wright, the cut still bearing the scent of sawdust. "I've never set foot here before," Mason declared, his breath mingling with the icy air. "I cannot fathom how my name came to be here." And so, the investigation unfurled, unraveling a tapestry of enigmas that sent shivers down the spines of all involved. Background checks on the names led to a chilling revelation. Each one belonged to a soul lost to the woods over the past 40 years, vanished without a trace. Some cases had grown cold with time, while others remained open wounds. Yet they shared a haunting similarity: all had disappeared while hiking alone, swallowed by the unforgiving forest. Forensic experts meticulously documented the carvings, noting the nuances of each mark. The oldest name, Rebecca Hansen, harkened back to a tragedy 37 years prior, a tale of a young woman lost to the woods, leaving behind only a solitary boot by a babbling stream. The focus shifted to Mason and his companions, their every move scrutinized for a clue. Emily Chen, the group's photographer, revealed eerie figures lurking in the background of her pictures, phantom-like shapes that defied explanation. And as the investigation delved deeper, a sinister truth began to emerge. In the depths of the house's basement, a macabre tableau awaited discovery. Personal effects of the missing hikers lined shelves, each item meticulously labeled with a name from the wall outside. Bloodstains, faded but indelible, whispered of untold horrors concealed within the shadows. As the net tightened around the elusive truth, Mason's demeanor grew increasingly haunted. He spoke of whispers in the night, of unseen eyes watching his every move. The specter of Victor Blackwood, the reclusive hunter who once called the house his own, loomed large over the unfolding mystery. A breakthrough came with the unearthing of Blackwood's journal, a sinister chronicle of his twisted pursuits. Detailed accounts of stalking his prey, of meticulous observations and sinister intentions, sent a chill through the hearts of all who read his words. The manhunt for Blackwood spanned vast territories, with no stone left unturned in the pursuit of justice. But as the shadows deepened, Mason vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a cryptic message scrawled on his bedroom wall. The hunt continued, relentless and unforgiving, until a hidden workshop revealed a grim reality. The lead forensic technician, missing and feared lost, became the latest victim of a malevolent force that defied comprehension. Surveillance tightened around the house, a silent vigil against the encroaching darkness. And when the figure emerged from the forest, tall and spectral, the trap was set. But as swiftly as it appeared, it vanished, leaving only questions in its wake. To this day, the house stands silent, a monument to the unknown. Mason and the technician remain lost to the shadows, their fate entwined with the enigma that haunts the woods. And as new disappearances grip the land, the names on the wall echo through the ages, a chilling reminder of a mystery best left undisturbed. Story 21. In the quiet stillness of a suburban neighborhood, a mysterious key arrived in the mail for Sarah Miller. Wrapped in a plain envelope with no return address, it was a single brass key, worn with time. Though unfamiliar to her, there was a strange sense of recognition that lingered in the air as she held it in her hand. Curious, Sarah tried the key in every lock she owned, but none would turn. It was not meant for her belongings. Perplexed, she placed the key on her coffee table, and in that moment, the old grandfather clock in the hallway let out a single, hollow chime, even though it had been broken for years. Puzzled and unsettled by this strange occurrence, Sarah reported it to the authorities. What started as a simple oddity soon unraveled into a chilling criminal investigation that would shake the foundation of the once peaceful neighborhood. At first, the responding officer dismissed Sarah's concerns, attributing the key's arrival to a possible mistake. However, Sarah's intuition told her otherwise. Reluctantly, the officer took the key as evidence, placing it in a small evidence bag that would later become central to a sprawling investigation. Detective Robert Harmon, a seasoned investigator with a keen sense for cases with hidden depths, received the file. The brass key sat on his desk, unassuming yet carrying an air of unease. Background checks on Sarah revealed no criminal history. A retired teacher with a quiet life, she seemed to be an innocent recipient of something inexplicable. Forensic analysis found no fingerprints on the key except for Sarah's. The envelope yielded no clues, only a generic postmark. The key itself, a standard Schlage, showed signs of age, hinting at years of use. A breakthrough came when Detective Harmon decided to run the key's unique pattern through the department database. Astonishingly, a cold case from 7 years prior bore an identical key, pattern a key linked to a storage unit where disturbing evidence had been found. The original investigation had hit a dead end due to lack of evidence, but as Harmon delved deeper into the files, a dark connection began to emerge. The key had a sinister history tied to unsolved mysteries and vanished women. As the investigation progressed, Sarah's anxiety grew, leading her to fortify her home with new locks and a security system. The looming question of why the key had been sent to her weighed heavily on her mind. A breakthrough in DNA analysis led investigators to a possible suspect, Harold Jenkins, a former neighbor of Sarah's with a shadowy past. Jenkins, a man of mystery with a penchant for secrecy, had left a trail of unanswered questions in his wake. The search for Jenkins intensified, revealing a chilling discovery at a secluded cabin linked to him. Hidden beneath the floorboards was a secret room containing rows of brass keys, each with a name and date attached. The keys unlocked a horrifying truth, a series of unspeakable crimes spanning years. As the manhunt for Jenkins spread nationwide, the community grappled with the revelation of a predator lurking in their midst. Fear and disbelief permeated the once tranquil neighborhood, now haunted by the specter of unspeakable evil. In a final, harrowing confrontation, authorities closed in on Jenkins as he tried to evade capture. The man behind the horrors chose a grim end, leaving behind a journal detailing his atrocities and a chilling message for Sarah, a haunting reminder of the darkness that had touched her life. The investigation unveiled the extent of Jenkins' crimes, bringing closure to families of the victims while leaving a scar on the community. Sarah, forever changed by the ordeal, could never return to the home that had been invaded by darkness. The case of the Keymaster remains a chilling example of the evil that can hide behind a facade of normalcy. It serves as a stark reminder of the depths of depravity that can lurk in the shadows, waiting to be unlocked by unsuspecting souls. In the quiet of an evidence locker, the silent testimony of brass keys speaks of lives cut short and the devastating truth of the darkness that can dwell within the ordinary. And as the world grapples with the aftermath, the search continues for signs of similar predators, hidden in plain sight, waiting to strike. Story 22. The tale unfolds in the dimming light of a closing costume shop where shadows dance among forgotten relics. Amidst the hushed whispers of clearance, a woman's hand reached for a mask, its delicate features a silent enigma. The cashier's unease was palpable as she placed it on the counter, a silent tremor passing between them. "That's not ours," he murmured, a flicker of fear in his eyes. Perplexed, she sought a tag but found none, shrugging off the cashier's unease as she carried it home. That night, a soft stir in the darkness roused her from slumber. A whisper of fabric shifting, a presence unseen. The mask, once resting innocently on her dresser, now perched ominously on her nightstand, its gaze fixed upon her. The woman known as Catherine Reed would be discovered by a concerned neighbor the following day. The morning light spilled into her home, revealing an open door and a chilling absence. Detective Morgan arrived, a figure of resolve amidst the eerie stillness. The scene held secrets in its silence, a puzzle waiting to be unraveled. No forced entry, no obvious signs of struggle, just a life extinguished, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. The medical examiner's somber pronouncement hinted at a death shrouded in mystery, terror etched upon the victim's frozen features. Catherine's life, once defined by a keen eye for authenticity, now lay in the shadow of enigma. Her colleagues spoke of her prowess, her ability to discern truth from deception with a glance. The detective pondered the connection between her gift and her untimely demise, a thread of curiosity leading deeper into the unknown. Security footage unveiled a moment of truth, a mask unrecognized, its origins a haunting enigma. The owner's cryptic words hinted at a darker legacy, one intertwined with the obscure and the inexplicable. Forensic revelations painted a grim picture, linking Catherine to a string of inexplicable deaths, each marked by a mask of terror and a silent scream. A retired detective's revelation shed light on a chilling truth, a ritual of soul transference, ancient symbols hidden within the masks, a malevolent force seeking vessels for its insidious purpose. Catherine's own journal, a testament to her descent into fear and paranoia, revealed a truth too dark to comprehend. As the investigation unfolded, a sinister presence loomed on the periphery, unseen yet felt a specter of dread that moved unseen, claiming lives in its wake. Surveillance footage captured a chilling sight, a figure donning the mask, moving with uncanny familiarity yet devoid of humanity, a puppet in a macabre theater of death. The mask's reappearance in a distant vintage shop hinted at a cycle unbroken, a legacy of terror reaching across time and space. The detective, keeper of Catherine's truth, bore witness to a reality beyond comprehension, a truth that lurked in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. And so the mask remains at large, a silent sentinel of fear and longing, seeking its next host in the dance of fate. As night falls and shadows lengthen, the echo of its presence lingers, a reminder of the darkness that dwells within, waiting to be unmasked by those who dare to see beyond the veil of illusion. Story 23. The river flowed lazily that morning, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting the early light in a mesmerizing dance. The fisherman, lost in the serenity of the moment, almost missed the sight of a suitcase bobbing near the shore. At first glance, it seemed like a forgotten relic, discarded carelessly. But as he approached, drawn by a curious instinct, a pungent odor assaulted his senses, thick, heavy, impossible to ignore. The case was bound by chains, weathered by time and exposure, hinting at a mysterious past. When authorities pried it open, the contents revealed a chilling truth. Not discarded clothes, but a haunting sight greeted them, hair tangled, fingers frozen in a silent grip, and at the bottom, a cryptic message awaited: "This isn't the first." Detective Sarah Mercer arrived at the scene, her steps measured, her expression unreadable as she took in the grim tableau before her. The victim, a woman in her 30s named Catherine Walsh, lay still, her once vibrant features now touched by the hand of the river. The medical examiner worked diligently, capturing every detail before the body was gently removed from its watery grave. What struck Mercer was not the brutality of the act, but the eerie sense of care that lingered around the victim: manicured nails, styled hair, adorned in luxury. She was not just disposed of, Mercer whispered to the wind, watching the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. She was presented, honored. Catherine Walsh, a successful real estate agent known for her impeccable taste, lived a life of solitude in a prestigious neighborhood. Divorced with no children, she was a woman of ambition and discretion, her colleagues attested. Her sudden disappearance, noted when she missed a crucial showing, sparked a wave of concern among those who knew her well. She would never miss this, her assistant maintained, a note of urgency in her voice. That sale meant everything to her. As investigators delved into Walsh's meticulously curated life, a portrait of perfection emerged. Her home, a sanctuary of modern elegance, held secrets beneath its pristine facade, every detail meticulously arranged, every surface gleaming with precision. Yet a whisper of disarray beckoned from her home office, a drawer slightly ajar, revealing a hidden journal. The final entry spoke of a lurking presence, a shadow that haunted her days. He watches, ever vigilant. The same car, different masks. In the digital realm, traces of a sinister obsession emerged. Unknown messages, each bearing the same unsettling phrase: "I see your perfection." A chilling pattern of surveillance, a web of silent threats closing in. Walsh's search history betrayed her fears, her efforts to fortify her sanctuary against an unseen intruder. Detective Mercer, unraveling the threads of darkness, pieced together a mosaic of terror. The meticulous care in the crime scene echoed the methodical nature of the perpetrator. "This was not a crime of passion," she murmured to her partner. "This was a ritual, a twisted ceremony of perfection and control." A break in the case came from an unexpected source, a pawnshop owner, recognizing Walsh's missing emerald necklace in the hands of a regular customer. Michael Linden, an unassuming maintenance worker, emerged as the silent architect of terror. Surveillance footage painted a haunting picture of Linden's movements, his presence a sinister shadow in Walsh's world. A search of his modest abode uncovered a gallery of horrors, photographs of Walsh and others, captured in moments of vulnerability, moments stolen without consent. Behind a false wall, a shrine emerged, a macabre tribute to his victims. Hair strands, lipstick marks, fragments of lives meticulously catalogued in a twisted display of devotion. Linden's arrest cast a chill over the interrogation room, his demeanor unfaltering, his words devoid of remorse. They were flawed, he confessed, his voice devoid of emotion. Their perfection was a lie, a mask I had to remove. The search for answers led investigators to remote corners where suitcases held echoes of past horrors. Each victim, a mirror of Walsh, a reflection of Linden's deranged quest for flawlessness. In the courtroom, silence reigned as the families of the fallen watched the wheels of justice turn, sealing Linden's fate with a life sentence. For Detective Mercer, the case closed a chapter of darkness, but shadows of uncertainty lingered. What drove Linden to such depths of depravity? What inner imperfections tormented his soul, driving him to seek perfection in the destruction of others? The river, ever flowing, carried away the remnants of tragedy, its waters whispering secrets to the night. In the precinct on Mercer's desk lay the chilling reminders of a nightmare, those meticulous notebooks, guardians of a darkness that lurked beneath the veneer of normalcy. A reminder that in the stillness of the night, in the quiet corners of our world, monsters may walk among us unseen, waiting for a single flaw to betray their presence. And in that realization, a shiver of unease danced on the edge of dreams, beckoning the listener to a realm of unsettling calm. Story 24, the aged box lay hidden beneath layers of forgotten clutter in the attic, a relic left behind by the house's previous inhabitants. Among the faded Polaroids within were snapshots of joyful birthdays and family gatherings, capturing moments frozen in time. However, one photograph stood out from the rest, shrouded in an eerie mystery that sent shivers down Rebecca's spine. In this peculiar photo, taken within her own living room, a family unknown to her sat on the familiar couch, smiling obliviously at the camera. Yet lurking in the shadows of the hallway stood a figure, a man watching, his presence barely discernible in the dim light. As Rebecca gazed at the unsettling image, a tremor ran through her fingers, setting the edges of the Polaroid to a gentle vibration. Descending the creaking wooden staircase, Rebecca carried the photo to her kitchen, where harsh fluorescent light revealed the uncanny resemblance between her home and the scene captured in the picture. The archway, the molding, the bay window all matched perfectly. This was undeniably her house, but the family within remained strangers, frozen in a moment of happiness as danger loomed nearby. Detective Morgan arrived, his weathered leather jacket hinting at a storied past filled with enigmatic cases. With eyes that seemed to miss nothing, he examined the photograph meticulously, his gloved finger tracing its edges before turning it over to reveal a blank back. In a low rumble, he inquired about the previous owners, the Nelsons, and what Rebecca knew of them. Rebecca confessed she knew little, as the sale had been handled through a realtor, and the Nelsons had already relocated out of state. Nodding thoughtfully, Morgan requested to take the photo for further investigation, hoping his team could unravel the enigma behind the mysterious family captured in the Polaroid. As the investigation unfolded, a pattern emerged. The Sutherland family, the previous occupants of the house, had vanished without a trace, just like the families before them. Each family had resided in the house for precisely 1 year before disappearing into thin air, leaving behind no traces of their whereabouts or intentions. Forensic analysis dated the photograph to 15 years prior, revealing subtle clues that hinted at a staged capture. The figure in the hallway remained a shadowy enigma, his identity obscured but his presence undeniable, a silent watcher in the midst of unsuspecting families. Delving deeper into the house's history, Detective Morgan unearthed records of a long-forgotten project manager named Samuel Whitfield, who had mysteriously vanished after completing the construction of the house. A chilling discovery linked Whitfield to the figure in the photograph, despite reports of his demise in a tragic accident. Beneath the house's concrete floor, a macabre revelation awaited the investigators. The missing families, including the Sutherlands, were unearthed, perfectly preserved in the cool earth, alongside a camera that had captured their final moments. Each family's fate had been sealed within the confines of the house, hidden from prying eyes until now. The attic revealed a hidden crawl space, housing a makeshift living quarters for an unknown observer who had meticulously documented the family's every move. The final entry in a journal hinted at a sinister plan, signaling a disturbing realization for Rebecca and those involved in the case. Retreating to a hotel under police protection, Rebecca found no solace as the night brought a chilling call, punctuated by the mechanical click of a Polaroid camera capturing unseen horrors. The investigation lingered, the house now a silent witness to unsolved mysteries, its secrets buried within its walls. The elusive Samuel Whitfield remained a phantom presence, his true fate shrouded in uncertainty. Some believed he had perished long ago, while others speculated on his continued existence, weaving a web of intrigue that stretched across time and space. And as new families settled into new homes, unaware of the lurking shadows that watched from within, the legacy of the man in the photograph continued to cast a haunting spell, drawing in those who dared to seek the truth behind the enigmatic figure and the chilling events that unfolded within the house's walls. Story 25. The aging apartment possessed its own peculiarities, a symphony of groaning pipes and creaking floorboards that sang a haunting melody through the halls. Yet the newest tenant, Sarah Coleman, discerned a discord in the nocturnal orchestra that echoed above her. The footfalls, deliberate and unwavering, descended from an unseen realm, creeping from the ceiling overhead with a ghostly precision. It was a mystery that lingered in the shadows, shrouded in the veil of night. One fateful evening, Sarah mustered the courage to challenge the enigma that plagued her solitude. With a broomstick as her scepter, she rapped on the ceiling, seeking to pierce the silence that enveloped her sanctuary. The echoes faded into nothingness, leaving behind a pregnant hush. Then, in defiance of reason, a single knock reverberated a solitary response from within the very confines of the ceiling itself. Sarah harbored the secret of the spectral knocking, a tale she dared not whisper to the outside world. She sought solace in the mundane explanations of settling timbers or the scurry of a fleeting creature nestling in the attic's embrace. Night after night, the measured footsteps continued their clandestine dance above, tracing unseen paths across the veil of darkness. Sarah adapted, cocooning herself in the artificial glow of the television, drowning out the eerie cadence with a cacophony of sound. Detective Morris was beckoned into the enigma when a diligent maintenance worker stumbled upon a concealed passage during routine repairs. Beneath the guise of a water leak repair, a hidden crawl space was unveiled, a clandestine enclave that defied the blueprint's logic. Illuminated by the worker's beam of light lay a clandestine abode, a realm of discarded wrappers, empty vessels, a forlorn blanket, and a weathered journal that whispered secrets long veiled in darkness. The police were summoned, and Detective Morris, accompanied by his partner Detective Rivera, ventured into the unknown. The maintenance worker, pallid and shaken, muttered of an unseen presence dwelling within the walls, a spectral voyeur, a silent sentinel. The journal chronicled Sarah Coleman's life with meticulous precision, a voyeuristic gaze that transcended the boundaries of privacy. The final scribbles bore witness to a descent into madness, marked by cryptic symbols and a chilling declaration of defiance. Forensic experts combed the hidden passages, unearthing fingerprints that eluded identification in any known database. A labyrinth of secret tunnels intertwined within the building's very structure, connecting disparate domains with a sinister purpose. The tendrils of the network converged upon Sarah's dwelling, where the voyeur's gaze found its focal point. Interviews with current residents yielded naught but echoes of normalcy, veiling the sinister truth that lurked in the shadows. Former tenants whispered of unseen eyes that bore into their souls, of whispers that echoed through the walls like specters of the night. The silence of the past tenants spoke volumes, a chorus of dread that resonated through the haunted halls. The veil of mystery lifted with the discovery of microscopic blood spatter in one of the hidden passages, a macabre signature that led the investigators down a path of darkness. Martin Weaver, a missing soul lost to the shadows, found his voice in the crimson echoes that stained the walls. A spectral link emerged, connecting the tapestry of disappearances that lingered in the wake of the unseen voyeur. Detective Morris delved into the annals of the past, unearthing the specter of Edward, a recluse shrouded in whispers and shadows. The phantom figure had traversed the realms of anonymity, leaving a trail of unspoken horrors in his wake. A pattern emerged, a web of deceit woven through the fabric of time and space, binding the fates of the unsuspecting. The final revelation came with the unmasking of Edward, now known as Mercer, a phantom of the night, a chameleon who melded into the shadows of the unseen. His lair, a cabin nestled in the heart of solitude, bore witness to his twisted obsession. The walls bore witness to his nefarious designs, a tapestry of lives entwined in a dance of shadows. The cadaver dogs led the investigators to the earth, where the secrets of the past lay buried in silent repose. Graves, unmarked and unseen, whispered of the lives lost to the phantom's gaze. Forensic anthropologists toiled in the shadows, seeking to unveil the identities of the forgotten, the lost souls who found their final rest in the embrace of the earth. As the specter of Edward loomed large in the minds of the investigators, the echoes of Sarah's absence lingered in the haunted halls. The crawl spaces sealed, yet whispers of unseen footsteps persisted, a chilling reminder of the phantom that lingered in the shadows. A notebook, a harbinger of the unseen, bore witness to a new chapter in the tale of darkness, a passage marked in crimson, a date etched in destiny. The hunt for Edward continued, a phantom lost to the winds of time. Sarah Coleman, a specter of the night, vanished into the annals of the unknown, a victim of the unseen voyeur's gaze. Her fate intertwined with the echoes of the past, a haunting reminder of the shadows that lurked in the heart of the night. Detective Morris, haunted by the specter of the unseen, found himself adrift in a sea of shadows, listening to the whispers that echoed in the night. The footsteps above, a symphony of dread, lingered in the silence, a reminder of the unseen eyes that bore witness to the darkness. And as he gazed into the depths of his own solitude, he wondered whose gaze lingered in the shadows, whose whispers echoed in the night, and whose fate intertwined with the echoes of the unseen. Story 26. The ancient library faced its imminent demise as the workers diligently carried out their task. In the midst of the chaos, a worker's stumble unveiled a hidden latch concealed within a dusty bookshelf. With a soft click, the bookshelf swung open, revealing a secret passage leading to a forgotten chamber. The air within was heavy, stagnant with the passage of time. The room was barren, save for a solitary chair at its center, firmly anchored to the floor. Etched repeatedly on the walls in a frantic scrawl was the haunting proclamation, "I am still here." The construction foreman swiftly contacted the authorities, turning what was supposed to be a routine demolition into a chilling mystery. Detective Morgan Walsh, a seasoned investigator, entered the hidden room, his flashlight piercing the darkness and revealing the unsettling message that adorned the walls. "Secure the area," Walsh commanded, his voice resonating in the confined space. "No one disturbs anything until forensics arrives." The library's history added a layer of intrigue to the unfolding mystery. Once owned by the influential Harrington family, the library had been gifted to the public following the mysterious disappearance of their daughter, Rebecca. She had vanished without a trace during her final year of college, leaving behind only her abandoned car near the woods. Despite extensive searches and investigations, the case had grown cold, shrouded in uncertainty and grief. As forensic experts meticulously combed through the hidden room, they uncovered traces of hair and fibers embedded in the chair, along with faint remnants of blood and skin cells amidst the scratches on the walls. Initial analysis hinted at the presence of a young female in distress. "This chair was meant to confine someone," the forensic analyst remarked, pointing to the weathered leather straps and bolt holes that hinted at struggle. Detective Walsh delved into the Harrington family's past, unsettled by the timing of the library's donation to the public shortly after Rebecca's disappearance. Further scrutiny unveiled a troubling detail: the contractor responsible for installing the bookshelf had close ties to Maxwell Harrington, Rebecca's uncle and the family patriarch. Financial records hinted at unusual payments made to the contractor, raising suspicions of hidden motives and dark secrets. Former library staff members expressed shock at the revelation of the hidden room, with one elderly librarian recalling Maxwell's peculiar attachment to that secluded corner of the building. She remembered how he adamantly insisted on preserving the area during renovations, citing its historical significance as his reason for doing so. The investigation took a grim turn when DNA evidence from the hidden room matched samples from Rebecca's personal belongings. The grim truth began to materialize: Rebecca had not fled, but had been imprisoned behind the secret walls by someone she trusted. Detectives swiftly obtained a warrant to search the Harrington estate, leading them to a startling discovery in Maxwell's study, a hidden journal chronicling his disturbing fixation on his niece. Maxwell's veneer of innocence crumbled as the evidence mounted against him. He confessed to the heinous crime, revealing his desperate attempt to silence Rebecca after she uncovered his long-standing embezzlement from the family foundation. In a moment of panic, he had imprisoned her, leading to a fatal altercation that sealed her tragic fate. Excavation beneath the hidden room unearthed Rebecca's remains, clad in the silver bracelet her parents had gifted her years ago. The Harrington family, bearing the weight of sorrow and betrayal, witnessed Maxwell's sentencing as justice was at last served. The library, once slated for demolition, stood as a somber memorial to a life cut short and a truth long concealed. Community members paid their respects, leaving tokens of remembrance at the library's entrance, a poignant tribute to a lost soul and a testament to the enduring power of justice. In a poignant twist, Rebecca's defiant message on the walls, "I am still here," echoed through the ages, ensuring that her memory would endure and that her voice would finally be heard. Story 27, The Mysterious House. She crossed the threshold, dust dancing in the still air, the abandoned house a relic frozen in time. Each room a snapshot of the past, draped in sheets, walls shedding memories. But there was a peculiar anomaly, a maze of doors, all leading back to the parlor. No matter her path, she always returned to where she started, the only exit the way she entered. Yet when she turned, the front door had vanished, leaving her trapped in a timeless loop. The discovery of Morgan Pierce's body turned the forgotten Victorian into a crime scene, shrouded in whispers and shadows. Detective Sarah Lynn stood amidst the eerie quiet, watching as forensic experts moved like phantoms through the dim interior. The house, once known for its mysterious allure, now held secrets darker than any whispered tale. The initial examination suggests she passed 3 days ago, the medical examiner murmured, his voice a mere breath in the heavy silence. Asphyxiation seems to be the cause of death. Morgan sat in the parlor, her posture serene, as if awaiting a long-lost guest. No struggle, no signs of fear. The scene held a haunting stillness that sent shivers down even the most seasoned investigators' spines. Lind inquired who found her. Her partner replied, a real estate agent showing the property. They stumbled upon her, thinking she was a trespasser until they drew near. The house had stood empty since Eleanor Blackwood's passing, a forgotten relic plagued by legal disputes and fading memories, a place where only the brave or the foolhardy ventured. Morgan, a young scholar delving into architectural enigmas, had been drawn to the Victorians' enigmatic reputation. Her journal spoke of strange echoes, shifting doorways, and a sense of being watched by unseen eyes. Her final entries hinted at uncovering spatial inconsistencies, a quest that led her into the heart of the house's mysteries. The autopsy unveiled a puzzling detailed traces of a rare substance in Morgan's system, hinting at rituals long forgotten. Her boyfriend insisted she was no thrill seeker, no reckless soul. Deleted messages on her phone revealed cryptic conversations with a mysterious figure who shared her obsession, hinting at secrets hidden within the ancient walls. The trail led to Adam Reeves, an expert in architectural anomalies who had captivated Morgan's curiosity. Their bond, a mix of professional intrigue and personal connection, hinted at a shared understanding of the house's enigmas. But Reeves, with an alibi miles away, seemed an unlikely suspect in Morgan's demise. A revelation from Eleanor Blackwood's grandson unveiled a chilling family legacy, a string of deaths, all peaceful, all in the parlor. The family spoke of the claiming, a whispered curse that haunted the halls of the Victorian. Journals spoke of a malevolent influence that lurked within the house's very walls, claiming those who dared tread its floors. A hidden chamber behind the parlor fireplace revealed artifacts of ancient origins, a shrine to forgotten deities of liminal spaces. Residue on the relics matched the substance found in Morgan's body, linking her fate to a power far older than the house itself. Dust patterns hinted at a presence unseen, a phantom lingering in the shadows. Weeks into the investigation, Adam Reeves joined Morgan in death, his apartment a mirror of her final resting place. Clutched in his hand, a key that unlocked the secrets of the hidden chamber, a doorway to realms beyond mortal comprehension. His final words echoed in the empty room, a warning of perception twisted by unseen forces. The case, shrouded in mystery, remains unsolved, the house condemned and abandoned, a forbidden beacon in the night. Whispers persist of lights flickering in its windows, of souls lost in its labyrinthine corridors. Some say the house claims those who seek its truths too eagerly, while others believe Morgan and Reeves glimpsed a reality beyond our own. The truth, like the house itself, remains a riddle without end, a mystery veiled in shadows and whispers, a tale of two souls lost in the spaces between worlds. And as the night falls and the stars twinkle overhead, the house stands silent, its doors forever leading back to the beginning, beckoning the curious and the brave into its timeless embrace.